Hey guys, it's Matt, the person reading this. I just wanted to preface by saying I'm sorry for the really badly pronounced French. I am very American and very much have never tried to pronounce French before, so please bear with me. I'm doing my best. Thank you. Choices by MesserMoon. Chapter 10. Chapter Summary. Welcome to the noble and most ancient House of Black. Chapter Notes. Trigger warning. Sexual assault, not graphically described. Child abuse, mostly magical, mostly psychological, a little physical. Trauma, PTSD, anxiety, panic attacks. Threatened forced outing. Okay, as you can tell, this is heavy, hopefully done in a way that is respectful of all of these experiences. Last thing, the purpose of this is to understand Regulus, not to excuse him or any of the bad things he may or may not do in this or any future chapters. All right, sorry, I'm done. I promise to stop ranting at the top of these chapters. Regulus was 11 the first time he fell in love with James Potter. It was really rather inconvenient, since he had already decided to hate him. Not for any of the obvious reasons, the tension between their families, the impending war, but because, until Sirius went to Hogwarts, Regulus had been his best friend. They would make forts and read stories and go for adventures in the back garden. When Regulus had a nightmare, Sirius was there. When their mother was angry, Sirius was there. When their father got sick, Sirius was there. But the summer after his first year at Hogwarts, all Sirius could talk about was James Potter. James Potter this and James Potter that, and oh, wasn't he so fantastic? Regulus quickly grew to despise him, a feeling his mother seemed to share. It wasn't that her and Sirius had ever gotten along particularly well. Sirius had never been very good at being quiet or sitting still or keeping his clothes clean. But they didn't start hating each other until Sirius went to Hogwarts, until James Potter came along. So, when he boarded the train the following September, with his mother whispering viciously in his ear about all the things she would do to him if he was to find himself sorted into Gryffindor like his brother, Regulus already hated James Potter, more than he had ever hated anyone else in his little 11-year-old life. Sirius had dragged him into the compartment with his friends, and Lupin had been kind and Pettigrew a little jumpy, and Potter barely looked at him. A nod of the head, that was all. Before him and Sirius were talking to one another a mile a minute, making jokes that Regulus didn't understand and telling stories he wasn't a part of. And the whole time, James Potter didn't look at him once, which was infuriating, because how was he supposed to communicate his intense dislike of the boy if he wouldn't even give him the time of day? Of course, this all became less of an issue after the sorting. Slytherins and Gryffindors are natural enemies. They rarely interact except when forced, and besides, Regulus was a first year, a little kid. It had never mattered to Sirius before that he was younger, but now he had Potter. So Regulus didn't see his brother much, or his brother's friends. And mostly, he felt lost. He drifted through his classes, quiet and reserved, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself, not wanting to be noticed. That was how he had always survived at Grimmauld Place. He assumed it would work at Hogwarts, too. He was wrong. A few weeks into school, Severus Snape found him kissing a boy. Or, perhaps more accurately, found a boy kissing Regulus. At 11, Regulus didn't much fancy kissing anyone. He found the whole thing rather unbecoming, if he was being honest. But Roger Flint was older and bigger, and didn't seem to care one way or the other what Regulus wanted. He tried to explain this to Snape after Flint ran off, but Snape was kind enough to inform Regulus that it didn't matter. People would think he was a freak either way, so it was in his best interest to do what Snape said, and that way no one would find out. It had not occurred to 11-year-old Regulus that Severus Snape, who barely had the strength in his lanky limbs to lift his own wand, was not going to out Roger Flint to the entire school. All he knew is he didn't want Sirius to know. Oh, how little things change. So he did as Snape asked. My homework, Black. My laundry, Black. Push that Hufflepuff down the stairs, Black. And Regulus did all of it. Unlike Sirius, he had always been very good at doing what he was told. A few months later, he watched James Potter punch Severus Snape in the face outside of the Great Hall. And, well, it was hard not to fall in love with him after that. Regulus takes these memories and puts them in a box, and then he buries it. He digs deep inside himself for the darkest, lowest corner, and he puts it there. He puts all of James there. You do not walk into Grimmauld Place with your walls down.
Mistress Black is out for the afternoon, but she tells Creature to inform his young master, Regulus, that she will be returning for supper at 6 o'clock sharp.
Regulus nods, standing awkwardly in the middle of his bedroom, feeling like a ghost, a stranger.
Creature is making Master Regulus's favorite, roast pheasant.
Regulus looks down at the elf and forces himself to smile. Thank you, Creature. I really appreciate it. The elf preens.
Of course, Master. Creature wants always to be a good help to the noble house of Black.
Regulus swallows. You are. Always. He needs to get himself more under control. He knows that. He's letting it all get to him. The gray walls, the heavy smell of the air, the missing photos on the walls. He can't be full of cracks the first time he sees her. Is my father up? He asks finally. Creature nods.
Yes, sir. He is very, very excited to be seeing Master Regulus, sir.
The elf does his best attempt at a smile, the sight oddly endearing despite all the teeth.
He will be taking his tea now, sir, in his bed.
Regulus nods. Excellent. Thank you, Creature. That's all for now. Creature gives him a bow, apparating out of the room before his head is raised. Regulus closes his eyes, feeling the walls as much as he sees them, the weight of them, the pressure. There's never any air in this fucking house. He breathes in deep, trying to calm the anxious tremors running up and down his bones. He exhales. All of these feelings are useless, and he needs to be done with them. There's no point in being afraid here. Better to wrap himself in a layer of apathy, of disinterest. Nothing matters, and if nothing matters, then nothing hurts. He opens his eyes, blinking the dim room back into focus and feeling the beginning of a familiar numbness spread through him. Good, he thinks, flexing his fingers, releasing some of the tension from his muscles. There is no privacy in Grimmauld Place. The walls are covered in the shadowy silhouettes of the Blacks of yore. They whisper and scowl and scurry about, and all of them belong to his mother, bent to her will. He feels their eyes on him now as he walks stiffly down to the floor below, their gazes making his skin itch. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. He pauses at his father's open door. His parents don't share a bedroom, of course. They haven't since Regulus was young, since before his father got sick. In his memories, his father is a towering figure, with big, warm hands and a domineering presence. He never spoke much, even back then, always quiet. Regulus knows that he takes after his father, just as he knows that Sirius takes after their mother. He's sure they've both ached over that truth. Now his father is sitting in a chair by the window, flannel housecoat wrapped around him, dark hair shot through with white, the curls, once so like Regulus's, gone limp. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. Papa? The older man's head snaps to the doorway, on edge, suspicious, before he finds Regulus's face, and then he smiles. For a moment, it almost doesn't look like he's dying. Reggie! He makes to stand but falters, his strength gone. Regulus has no doubt the Creature is the one who helped him into that chair in the first place. He crosses the room quickly so his father won't try again, bending down so he can wrap his arms around him. Look at you, his father gushes, as he keeps his hands on Regulus's shoulders, even as he straightens up. You've grown. Regulus rolls his eyes. It's been 3 months. But his father only grins. Ah, not up but in, Mosho. Your eyes are far wiser than they were this summer. Regulus feels the twinge of something in his chest, but quickly smothers it. It will not serve him to remember everything that has changed since the summer. Not here, not now. Viens. His father gestures to the chair across from him. Asseyez-vous, asseyez-vous. Parle ton père pendant un moment. Parle-moi de ta vie. Je devine faux concis dans ces pièces. His French is rapid, one word blending into the next. Orion spent most of his childhood growing up in the French countryside, so when he's tired, or drunk, or sick, It's the language that spills out of him. Regulus has always loved the way his father speaks French, the deep way his voice wraps around the vowels and hugs the end of each word, slow and smooth, in a way English never can be. His mother hates it, but it's only because she's not very good at it. Expensive tutors are no substitute for the real thing, and Walburga cannot stand to be outdone in anything. Okay. Regulus takes his seat. There's really not that much to say. I study, I play Quidditch. That's it. He shrugs. His father makes a scoffing noise, leaning slightly forward in his chair. More than play. You think you could pull off a Wronski feint and Horace wouldn't tell me, huh? Regulus feels himself blush. It wasn't that impressive. Please, I hear the scouts are already talking about you. You never know. You might be the youngest player to sign with a major team in Quidditch history, huh? On ne sait jamais. Don't we? Regulus almost says. Because they both know that even if he was approached by a team, next year, 2 years from now, Walburga would never allow it. He's needed for the cause. Everything else is dust. Maybe, he answers instead, looking out the window, the sky nearly as gray as the wallpaper. They really keep you cooped up in here all the time? His father makes an irritated grumble. Bloody healers, won't let me do anything. They're only trying to help. That's certainly what they say. Regulus rolls his eyes, turning back to his father, who instantly holds his hands up in surrender. Merde, Reggie, don't look at me like that. I'm following the orders, doing what they say. I swear, mon petit. You better be. I am. Why do you think I'm so miserable, huh? He shoots Regulus a playful grin that the younger boy does his best to return. Okay then, his father mockingly repeats. I don't sound like that. You absolutely do, monsieur. Instead of responding, Regulus reaches for one of the biscuits in the untouched plate in front of him, eyeing his father's thin frame as he takes his first bite. You're not eating, he says after he swallows. It's not a question. His father is a shell of what he once was, shoulders slumped, skin hanging off his bones in unnatural ways. I eat, his father says dismissively, but Regulus only scowls, shoving the rest of his cookie in his mouth. Not enough. Orion laughs. Geez, who's the parent here? I don't know, Regulus thinks. You tell me. But for the second time, he holds his tongue. His father pauses then, eyes flicking nervously toward the door. She's not here, Regulus says, answering the question that wasn't asked. Orion nods. Have you spoken to your brother? Regulus's heart drops. Sirius is a dangerous topic in this household, and he's not sure he's up for the task of walking through that minefield right now. Yes, he says slowly, not sure what else he can say. Not when his father is looking at him like that. He's well. His father smiles softly. That's good. Regulus only nods, looking back out the window. There was a wedge between him and Sirius, the moment his brother could escape, the moment he didn't have to rely on Regulus's company alone anymore. But it wasn't until last summer that Regulus thinks his brother really lost faith in him. It wasn't the night he left. Nothing so explosive and obvious. It was a quiet moment. Regulus leaning against the doorway of Sirius's bedroom. Sirius ignoring him. I don't know what you want me to do, Sirius, he'd asked, feeling equal parts annoyed and apologetic. Sirius had sighed. Rubbing his eyes like talking with Regulus was exhausting. Maybe it was. I want you to fight back, Sirius had said finally, the first words he'd spoken to Regulus all day. Fight back, Regulus answered before he could think better of it, before he could remember who he was speaking to. What's the point? Sirius had just looked at him then. Looked at him like he had never seen him before. Like he had no idea who he was. And maybe he didn't. Regulus! He's on his feet instantly, arms stiff at his sides as his mother opens the door to his room. She's a slight woman, dark hair pulled back tightly, dark robes pooling at her feet when she stands. She has Sirius's eyes. Maman, he says stiffly, unsure of which of her faces intends to show itself today. Her eyes run him over before stepping forward, taking his chin sharply between her index finger and thumb. "You look thin." He doesn't know what to say to that, so he says nothing, remaining compliant and silent as she looks him over. "And your hair's too long." He sometimes envies muggles, who have to put so much energy and intent behind all of their actions, who have to walk everywhere and pick everything up and wait for things to finish. It all means so much less to wizards. It's all too easy, too quick. The words are barely out of his mother's mouth before he feels the icy fingers of her magic, curls falling lifeless at his feet. He looks down for a moment, mournful. "Better." His mother steps back, admiring her handiwork. "Your grades are good?" she asks sharply, the change in topic sudden but not surprising. While Berga is rarely wasteful with her words when it comes to her children. "Yes." She nods. "Come down. Supper is ready. Tomorrow your cousins will be here." Regulus feels his stomach clench as she walks toward the door. "When are they coming?" He hopes she doesn't hear the tension in his voice. "Noon," while Berga tosses over her shoulder, already in the hall. Regulus lets out a shaky breath, then lifts his hand to his newly cut hair. Well, cut is a bit generous. The hair is short and prickly and close to the scalp. Not completely gone, but about as short as it's possible to go. It shouldn't ache. He's not sure why it does. He vanishes the hair on the floor on his way out the door. He wants to fly, but there's no room. Not here in the city, hidden behind layers and layers of secrecy charms. So he goes for a run instead. The air is crisp, the pavement freshly cleared of snow. Regulus can see his breath freeze outside his lips as he forces it out of his lungs again and again. He's not sure how long he's been gone for. A while, if the aching in his muscles are anything to go by. Still, it's not enough. Still, he can't get himself to quiet down. So he keeps going, block after block. The sun is now fully in the sky. A bright day for December, though it has no warmth. He doesn't allow himself to think about anything except taking the next step, except fighting the weakness in his legs. He blocks out the world beyond London, beyond Grimmauld. He doesn't think about Hogwarts, or about anything that transpired within it. And whenever those thoughts or feelings try to drag themselves to the surface, he gets a new box. He digs a new hole. He buries himself deeper and deeper. He can barely stand when he gets home.
"Master Regulus has missed his breakfast,"
Creature says unhappily as Regulus drags himself into the kitchen, showered and clothed and light-headed. "Sorry, Creature," he says as he sits down at the work table, watching the elf rush about, preparing for lunch.
"Creature is told by Mistress that he cannot feed Regulus now, that he will have to wait for his cousins."
Regulus nods slowly, resting his chin on his folded arms and taking in a deep breath. It smells of caramelized onions and roast beef. His stomach responds accordingly. Creature shoots him a look over his shoulder, but Regulus doesn't move. "I'll wait," he says, reassuring the elf. But Creature only shakes his head.
"I cannot be feeding Master Regulus, you understand. I have been told so I will not."
Regulus is opening his mouth to once again affirm that he understands when a plate of bread and cheeses appears in front of him.
He would like to help Master Regulus very much, but he simply cannot go against his mistress's wishes.
Regulus blinks, lifting his head off of his arms, a small smile pulling at his mouth. "Thanks, Creature." He reaches for the food, that much hungrier now that it's in front of him.
"Do not be thanking me, I am doing nothing."
But he swears he sees the elf wink. Regulus has always liked the kitchen the best. Maybe because it's the warmest place in the house, or because Creature always gives him some of what he's cooking. Probably, he imagines, it's because the rest of his family never really comes in here. Not even Sirius, when he was still around. It's a nice escape, a place where he can breathe a little easier. It's partially underground, the window above the sink level with the grass in the garden, the walls made of untreated stone, the fireplace enormous and deep, allowing for all manner of cooking and brewing. The floor and table are unvarnished wood, Everything in this space is soft and natural and lacking the artifice that is strewn throughout the rest of the house. There are no portraits, no gaudy embellishments, nothing is covered in gold or ivory. Regulus imagines that this is what a real home is meant to feel like. He forces himself to relax as he eats, forces his shoulders to come down from his neck, forces his muscles to let go. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. He's okay. This is okay. He's done it a dozen times before. There's no reason for it to be any different now. The feeling, when it comes, is like falling into a frozen lake, but slowly. It starts at his head and trickles through his body, his hands freezing on their way to his mouth and then suddenly dropping back to the table. Stand up. And he does. Before he can think about the fact that the voice isn't his own, or that an unnatural calm has suddenly settled around his bones. Turn around. Bellatrix is grinning at him, wild brown curls cascading down her back as Rodolphus throws himself into the chair beside Regulus, looking entirely bored by the situation.
Oh, widow Regulus.
She presses the tip of her wand to his forehead, and he wants to move. He does. Wants to knock it away, but he can't. He can't move. He can barely think. You never learn, do you? She draws the wand down his nose, his lips, flicking it off the edge of his chin. On your knees, says the voice in his head. His body drops with a painful crack onto the hard stone floor. He can feel himself tremble, hear the labored breathing in his ears. She's in his head, in his skin. What trick should he do next? She stalks around him, hand running over his shaved head. Rodolphus leans forward, elbows on his knees, face coming into view. Regulus can't turn his head, can't follow his cousin's path, can't look away from her husband's empty eyes. Bark, he says, an ugly smile stretching his face. Bellatrix laughs. Bark, commands the voice. Bark, bark, bark. And he does. On his knees, he barks. Enough, enough. Bellatrix stops in front of him, still laughing. Stop. He goes quiet, throat raw, struggling to push back against her presence inside his head and failing. He fails every time. Bellatrix sticks out her foot, sleek black leather pushing into the center of his chest. He barely notices. His ribs already feel too tight, his lungs barely able to breathe. Kiss it, she says, amusement clear in her voice. Rodolphus snorting in the background. Kiss it. He tries, really. Tries to pull his power out from behind the veil of the spell, but it's nothing but a distant yell, a muffled voice. So he does as he's told. Doesn't he always? Oh, here you are. It's his mother. He can't see her because Bellatrix hasn't ordered him to look, hasn't allowed him to take his mouth off her shoe. But he doesn't need to. He would know her voice anywhere. There's a brief pause. He isn't sure what her face is doing, what she thinks about the scene in front of her. Come, lunch is ready. Narcissa and Lucius are in the dining room. And then, almost as an afterthought, honestly, Regulus, you must learn to strengthen your mind. We practiced this. They did. Over and over again. By the end of the summer, Regulus had felt raw with it, like his body had been turned inside out. He hears the sound of his mother's shoes as she walks away. Pity. Bellatrix throws him off her foot. Looks like playtime's over. He gasps as the spell lets go, as he comes crashing back down into his body, catching himself on his hands as they tremble along with the rest of him. Come now, little cousin. We don't want to keep your mamma waiting. He can't lift his head. It's too heavy, the room spinning. He watches their feet, Rodolphus getting out of his chair, the pair of them sauntering into the hallway. Inhale, exhale. His skin is clammy, drenched in a cold sweat. Inhale, exhale. He barely has time to turn his head before he's retching all over the kitchen floor. He doesn't know how there can be so much when he's barely eaten. You'd think after all this time he'd be used to this feeling, but it never gets easier. Being invaded. It never gets easier, and he never gets stronger. Regulus collapses onto his back, chest heaving as he tries to focus on the soothing feeling of the cold floor on his skin. It's only a few moments before Creature's worried face appears above him.
"Master Regulus must be getting up now,"
he says, placing a small hand on Regulus's back and helping him peel himself off the ground. With the snap of his fingers, there's a glass of water being pressed to Regulus's lips. He drinks, gratefully. Thank you, he croaks. Sorry about the... He gestures to the puddle of sick behind them, but Creature only shakes his head, snapping his fingers again, leaving behind a clean floor.
"What is a mess to a house elf?"
Regulus almost smiles. "Regulus!" His mother's voice rings out. She doesn't scream, she commands. There's a difference. He winces as he hands the water back to Creature and gets unsteadily to his feet. For a second, the room sways. Inhale, exhale.
"Master Regulus."
Reg tries to force a smile. It's fine, Creature. Just have to make it to the table. Right? He doesn't have to see his face, know how pale he must look, how weak.
"Creature will send in soup."
But Regulus shakes his head. No, best not change anything. You know how they are. Creature only stares back at him helplessly. Regulus keeps his hand pressed to the wall all the way down the hallway to steady himself, only taking it off the minute he comes into view. The dining room is largely taken up by a long black table. His mother is at the end, of course, his father nowhere to be seen. In bed, Regulus supposes. Bellatrix and Rodolphus on one side, Narcissa and Lucius on the other. There he is. Narcissa smiles at him, hair charmed blonde to match her fiancé's. She gets out of her chair and pulls him into a hug that Regulus does his best not to flinch away from. He does not want to be touched. Not right now. Merlin, you're so big. I can't believe it most of the time. He smiles stiffly as she pulls him onto the seat next to her. Lucius nods his head in acknowledgement, and Regulus does the same, even though it makes his stomach roil. There are appetizers on the table, but Regulus isn't sure he can trust himself not to throw them back up yet, so he chooses to focus on his plate. Eyes following the pattern, hands clenched in his lap. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. You were saying, Rodolphus? His mother gives him a detached once-over before returning her attention to her niece's husband. Minsham has agreed to put more Dementors around Azkaban. He'll announce it next week. New security measures. Put all the troublesome Death Eaters in their place. Regulus's eyes rise at that, at the bubbling laugh that comes out of Bellatrix's mouth. He doesn't know, then? Walburga asks mildly. Minsham? Not a clue. He's quite happy with Lucius and I for suggesting it, isn't he, Lou? Rodolphus rips into one of the buns on the table, gesturing to the man across from him. Appreciates our no-nonsense approach, Lucius says dryly, eliciting more laughter from Bellatrix. And the Dementors? We can rely on them? His mother goes on. Sure, for what we need, Rodolphus shrugs. He speaks with his mouth half full, chewing lazily. The Ministry has never done anything for them, and our Lord can be so very convincing. Whether or not they'll fight with us, I can't say, but I can promise they won't fight against us. They'll let the prisoners go, then? Narcissa asks, leaning forward slightly. Rodolphus nods, swallowing. We go get 'em, the Dementors will let them walk, no question. Good, his mother says, as Regulus feels something start to scratch as the inside of his skin. It'll make it harder for them to slow us down. Not that they were able to do much of that anyway, Lucius says dryly, smug looks and low chuckles exchanged around the table. There's a whoosh of air, and suddenly steaming pots and dishes appear before them. Ah, excellent. His mother sits up straighter. Everyone, lunch is served. Several hours later, and they're still talking. Meals never last a reasonable time with them, drifting into the late afternoon and early evening. Once a sufficient number of brandies and wine glasses have been had, Regulus slips away. It's a relief, the quiet darkness of his room. For a moment, he leans his forehead against the wall and exhales. Nothing matters. Nothing matters. Nothing matters. He thinks about visiting his father, but he's worried he'll wake him up, or that they'd hear him downstairs, that they'd realize he'd left. No, better to stay here, quiet. It wasn't until last summer that he realized what a shield Sirius had been for him. It was easy to disappear when his brother was around. Pathetic, he knew, but Sirius always handled it so well. Got up from every hit like he couldn't even feel it. Nothing seemed to touch him. Meanwhile, to Regulus, everything feels like water in his lungs. The door opens and Regulus whips around, Lucius knocking the wand out of his hand with the flick of his own. Fuck. Hiding, are you? The older man smiles, crowding him against the wall. His breath smells of alcohol. Go away, Lucius. He doesn't look at his face, but somewhere off his left shoulder. Safer that way. Tisk, not very nice of you. He grabs a hold of Regulus's jaw, pulling it forward with a grip that will no doubt bruise. We've talked about that mouth of yours. For the second time that day, Regulus feels like he's going to be sick. Lucius is too close. Too fucking close, and he can't breathe. He can't stand all these hands on him. It makes something deep inside him ache. He would speak, but Lucius's grip is too tight. His mouth too suffocating, pressing into him. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. If nothing matters, then nothing hurts. Regulus brings his knee to meet Lucius's stomach, taking the older man by surprise, which is enough to let Regulus throw him off, making a dive for his wand, which sits on the floor by the door. His fingers have only just wrapped around the handle when he feels a sharp pain shoot through him. Lucius's pointed dress shoe ramming itself into his side. He isn't fast enough. He never is. Suddenly, he finds himself on his back, Lucius's foot pressing down on his chest. What the hell was that, you little brat? He spits, wand aimed at Regulus's face. His chest struggles against Lucius's weight. I'm not doing this, Lucius. I'm not doing it anymore. Lucius arches his eyebrow. You're not doing this anymore, he repeats icily, pushing down on Regulus for emphasis, forcing a gasp out of him as the air rips from his body. They'll notice you've gone. He's feeling desperate now, hand groping on the floor for his wand, not sure where it went after he got kicked. A sickening leer carves itself into Lucius's mouth. You think they'll care? Regulus swallows with great difficulty. Narcissa will care, he manages to force out. So, if you want her to pump out your pureblood pups, you'll get the fuck out of my room before I start screaming. Regulus knows what Sirius would do in these situations, though he imagines he probably doesn't find himself in them very often. Nobody looks at Sirius and thinks, weak. Target. Lucius's eyes are intense as he bends forward, bringing their faces closer together and tilting his to the side, like Regulus is an exhibit he's trying to puzzle out. And then he smiles. Oh, Regulus, have you found yourself a boy? Regulus grits his teeth, feeling the box rattle down inside him, but he keeps it closed, he keeps it buried, keeps his thoughts empty of faces and voices and hands that never ask for more than he can give. Does he know that this is what you're really like? Lucius lets out a cruel laugh. A worm, pathetic and groveling and used. It shouldn't hurt. He doesn't know why it does. A few moments of tense silence pass before Lucius straightens up, taking his foot off of Regulus and smoothing out his robes. Have it your way, he says loftily, Regulus gasping on the floor below him. But you know, he goes on as he pauses by the door, the light from the hallway cutting brutally through the dark room. He'll figure it out eventually. What a sad little thing you are. And I can't imagine he'll want you after that. Regulus doesn't move until he's alone again, sitting up against the wall and pulling his knees in, resting his head on top of them. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. He wonders, absent-mindedly, if other people have to remind themselves to breathe, or if that's just him. You see, Roger Flint was the first boy who didn't care what Regulus wanted, but he wasn't the last. "I want you to fight back." That's what Sirius had said. The truth is, Regulus doesn't stay because he feels very strongly about his family's cause, about the supremacy of purebloods. He supposes maybe they have a point sometimes. He isn't sure. But really, Regulus stays because he doesn't think Sirius's side can win, that they stand any chance at all. His parents, their friends, they have so much power, so much money and influence. "I want you to fight back," Sirius had said. But what's the point? What's the point of fighting for a lost cause? Regulus spends Christmas morning with his father. Creature helps him bring him down to the living room where the fire is lit and the tree is sparkling, and his father makes him open all his gifts like he's still a little kid. They drink hot chocolate and eat pancakes. His father starts singing a terribly off-key version of Jingle Bells, and when Regulus can't get him to stop, he joins in. His mother's out. She has meetings. According to his father, she has a lot of those these days, though he's rather vague about who they're with or what they're about. Regulus doesn't push the matter. He doesn't really want to know. "Do you remember when you were 6? I already don't like where this is going," Regulus laughs from the floor. He's resting on his hand, legs stretched out in front of him as he looks up at his father. He's still in his pajamas, even though it's nearly 1. His father, too, though these days he's rarely in anything else. In the background, Celestina Warbeck's Christmas record is on. No, this is a good one," his father grins. "Uh-huh. I'm not sure our definitions of good are the same, but go on." "Il pense qu'il est si drôle. A little respect wouldn't kill you, eh?" He winks at Regulus, who rolls his eyes. "You were barely up to here." He holds his hand out at waist height, "and you followed Sirius everywhere he went. You two were absolutely inseparable." "I followed him everywhere until the day he got on that train," Regulus thinks, but doesn't say. His father is so rarely in a good mood, and he doesn't want to ruin it. "And it had snowed all night. The hills were practically up to my neck." "You are exaggerating." "Pfft, I am not. There'll be pictures somewhere, I'm sure. Anyway, we turned our backs on you for 2 seconds. I swear, we were, I don't know, cleaning up the kitchen or something, and then you were gone. Poof." "We were 6 and 7. I find it hard to believe we were quite that stealthy." "Oh, but you were. We searched the whole house, calling out your names. Your mother was absolutely beside herself. And then I looked out the window and I saw a little red shirt tied to the stick on the top of a snowbank." Regulus actually does remember this. Remembers how badly his hands stung from digging in the snow. Remembers how pleased he was when Sirius told him he was doing a good job. "So we go outside, only to see that you two have turned the entire back garden into a snow fort, and Sirius comes wandering out and informs us, quite formally, that we are on his property." Regulus remembers that too. Remembers staying behind, inside their little snow tunnels, watching Sirius face their parents. Alone. Always alone. Said he was going to be living in his fort, and that since he was no longer under our roof, he no longer had to follow our rules. His father starts to laugh. No longer the big, boisterous sound it once was, but quiet. Rough. Ending in a cough. "Are you okay, Papa?" Regulus moves forward, placing his hand on his father's back. "Oui, Reggie. I'm fine. He exhales, leaning back in his chair. "You two were such a pair." He smiles to himself. "You still speak, yes? At school?" "Yes, Papa." He lies again. "Yes, all the time." "Good, that's good." His eyes drift close, breath still hitching in his chest. It doesn't take much these days to wear him out. "La famille est importante, mon cher. Ton frère par-dessus tout. Le son remettra. Elle come back." His English and French blend together. No, Regulus doesn't have the heart to tell him. No, I don't think he will.
"Perhaps it be time to returning Master Black to his bed,"
Regulus starts at Creature's sudden appearance, hand tightening protectively over his father before he forces himself to relax. Yeah, that's a good idea. He looks back down. Come on, Dad. Let's get you upstairs, okay? His father grumbles, but doesn't put up nearly the fight Regulus expects him to. Joyeux Noël, mon fils, he mumbles as Regulus helps him into bed, pulling the blankets all the way up to his shoulders. He's asleep almost as soon as he puts his head on the pillow. Joyeux Noël, Papa. He pauses for a moment, remembering that day in the snow. Sirius had been so excited. This is ours, he had told Regulus. It'll be just us here. They can't come in. Walburga took his voice for that. One flick of her wand and Sirius couldn't speak for 3 days. That, of course, was not part of their father's story. It never was. Regulus makes it all the way to the hall outside his bedroom before he stops, looking across the way to the other door. He hasn't seen it open since last summer, since he left. It's foolish, really, stupid, but he finds himself moving toward it anyway, finds his hand turning the doorknob. It even smells like Sirius. Hair products and leather boots. The walls are covered in red and gold, lions roaring overhead. For days last summer, their mother had sat in this room trying to peel them off, but whatever spell Sirius used was strong, because not a single poster came down. He hadn't had time to take anything the night he left, so his room remains unchanged. Like any minute, he might walk back in. Regulus takes a tentative step forward, toward the familiar bed, hands trailing along the walls and dressers, like he's trying to make sure they're really there. He used to spend a lot of time in this room, reading, playing, hiding from monsters. It feels different from the rest of the house. Even when he's gone, Sirius still has so much presence. He bleeds out of every corner, undeniable, a force. Regulus sits down on the side of the bed, eyes roaming over the room, catching on a picture on the bedside table. Shaking, his hand reaches out for it, framed in a clunky plastic thing. It's of Sirius and his friends, somewhere in Hogwarts, maybe 3rd year. James is caught in a laugh, smile spread big across his face as he throws his head back. Regulus knows that laugh, knows what it sounds like, feels like, and tastes like. The box strains inside him, begging him to open it up, to think of all the things he can't afford to think right now, not while he's in this house that is so hungry to tear things apart. Still, he slips off the back of the frame and slides the photo into his pocket. Stupid. He lets out a breath, eyes sweeping over the room one last time before he gets up and heads back into the corridor. What are you doing? He freezes with his hand on the doorknob. Regulus, his mother says stiffly from the top of the stairs. What were you doing in there? He almost laughs, because of course she comes home now. I wanted to see if his Quidditch gear fit, he says flatly, a voice he's perfected over the years. It works on most people. Are you lying to me? She asks, stepping nearer. And Regulus tries to get his pulse under control, the hair raising on the back of his neck as her dark eyes zero in on him. No. But of course, it's too late. He knows what's going to happen, even before she raises her wand, before she whispers the spell. It burns when she forces her way into his thoughts, flipping through them like the pages of a book. They whip before his mind's eye at a breakneck speed, making him feel dizzy. But he was careful. He was ready. He put all the things that could hurt him away. He's buried them deep. She won't find them. She won't. Except for the picture. She grabs hold of it, focusing in on the moving faces of the young boys. No, Regulus thinks pathetically, hoping she doesn't hear, trying to quiet his own thoughts, but they persist. No, leave them alone. Leave him alone. He gasps as she pulls back. Give it to me, she says coldly. He stares at her, unsure of why this feels like such a betrayal. Regulus, now. Slowly, he reaches for the photograph, barely getting it out of his pocket before she's ripping it away from him. Eyes never leaving his face even when she sets it on fire, letting it drop to the floor and curl in on itself, turning to ash. "He is not your brother." And Regulus almost sighs with relief that she couldn't tell who he was focusing on. "Do you understand?" "Oui, maman." Her shrewd eyes run him up and down, sending shivers along his spine. "This summer, you will take the mark." He blinks. "What?" "It's past time. Things are happening, Regulus. I need you to take your place." Sirius's place, you mean? But he doesn't say it out loud. "I'm not finished school," knowing, of course, that it won't matter. "And you needn't be, as if they teach you anything of quality anyway. I only allowed you to return this year because your father insisted." He says nothing. He has nothing to say. Nothing that won't end with him in pain anyway. "Things are changing, Regulus." She walks away, the picture a cold pile of ash on the floor. "And nothing will be the same once we're done." He wonders if she means for it to sound like a threat. He imagines she probably does. It was Sirius who taught him the trick with the box, taught him how to hide things in his own head. He wonders if his brother still does it sometimes, still hides parts of himself away, or if now that he's free of this place he doesn't need to, if he gets to remember without fear. He'd like to ask him. He's sure he never will. He has Creature drop him off in London. He's 2 hours early for the train, but he can't stand being in that house anymore. He doesn't go to Diagon Alley like he said he would, or to Platform 9 3/4. Instead, he finds a bench in the Muggle train station and sits, leaning back and closing his eyes, listening to the crowds rushing around him, trains arriving and departing, the voice over the loudspeaker buzzing in his ears every 5 seconds. He feels delicate, a nervous shaking inside his skin that promises it won't take much to pull him apart. "Regulus." He starts, eyes flying open, heart jolting against his ribs. His wand is in a holster on the inside of his arm, but he doesn't dare pull it out here. A middle-aged woman stands over him. She has dark brown hair with a single white streak in the front that has been braided down her back. Her face is kind. She smiles softly at him. "I'm Euphemia Potter." She holds out her hand. Regulus feels something shoot through his chest, something pull at his gut. He blinks up at her and then down at her hand. He shakes himself. "Sorry, Mrs. Potter, it's nice to meet you." He reaches out and takes her hand, her grip warm and strong. Now that she's said it, he can't not see it, the similarities between her and her son. The box rattles again, with all the feelings and thoughts he still doesn't feel strong enough to face. Not now. Not yet. It'll be too much. "Can I sit with you?" She nods to the empty spot beside him. "Oh, yeah, of course." He doesn't know what to do with his hands, eventually finding them fidgeting in his lap, his eyes unable to meet her gaze. "I see you're an early bird too, huh?" she says kindly. "The boys have gone to Diagon, but I've always liked this station. Excellent place for people watching." The boys. He's not sure he can manage this conversation right now. He already feels on the verge of coming apart. "Are you excited for the new term? I hear you have Quidditch games soon." That gets him to look up, meeting her stare head-on. He has experience in holding stares, but hers is different. A different kind of intense. Have you?" is all he manages to get out, and her smile becomes a bit more mischievous. "Oh, yes. I've heard about the feint you pulled so many times I feel like I was there myself." He swallows with difficulty, unsure of what to do with the knowledge that he's been a topic of conversation in the Potter household. "You know, my son is a bit of an open book," she goes on. Regulus does know. He's obsessed with it. He's afraid of it. "I'm never sure if that means I've done something right as a mother or something very wrong, but it's too late now, either way, I suppose." Her eyes drift out calmly over the rushing people in front of them. But gosh, did he ever light up when he talked about you. She looks back at him and suddenly his chest feels too tight. "Please stop," he wants to tell her, but he's not sure he means it. Part of him's greedy, hungry, desperate for more. "Regulus, I want you to know," she goes on softly. that our door is always open, okay? If you ever need it. It's all a bit too much, if he's being honest. He's had too many people in his head recently, too many hands on his skin. There's nothing stable about him. He's all weak foundations and cracking beams, his body ready to cave in on itself. He coughs, trying to clear the weakness out of his throat. I should go. The train. Even though they both know he has plenty of time. Still, she nods her head, smiling all the same. Of course. Don't let me keep you. He gets up shakily, hoping he can make it through the barrier in this state. It was nice to meet you, Mrs. Potter. Effie, please. He nods, though he knows he will never call her that. He wonders if Sirius does, or if he just calls her Mum. It's a title that suits her, far more than it ever has his own mother. His body feels awkward and out of place as he walks away from her, through the crowd, none of his limbs moving the right way. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. Regulus sleeps for most of the train ride, Evan and Barty bickering with one another in the seats across from him. He makes a point of not looking at anyone on the platform when they arrive, or in the great hall at dinner. Hours later, he finds himself sitting alone in the Slytherin common room. Unable to concentrate on his readings, or do any of the coursework he neglected over the break, he stares into the fire and wonders if he should just go to bed, if he shouldn't just let this whole thing die. Of course, he's thought that before, thought it nearly every time. It's not really a question when the answer is so obvious. He should. Of course he should, especially in the state he's in. His foot taps nervously on the floor, eyes flicking up from the fire to the clock on the mantel. He should just go to bed. It would be better for both of them. He should. He doesn't, of course, but he should. He wonders how James will know to come now that he won't be able to see Regulus on the map. He wonders if he'll remember how to get in. He wonders if the room would keep him out if Regulus asked it to. He doesn't ask it to, that is, but he thinks about it. He makes a concerted effort not to look at the bed, not to remember the last time he was in this room, the box still closed, though cracks have started to splinter it, have started to let things leak through. He isn't at all sure he can handle this, isn't at all sure how to. It's never been this bad. He's never felt this broken apart. It was too quiet in that house, too cold, and now all of a sudden there are so many people and voices and so much heat that he feels like he's burning up. You cut your hair. Regulus's head snaps up, and he doesn't know how he missed the sound of the door opening. And oh shit. Something yanks at his chest, yanks hard. This was a bad idea. He knew this was a bad idea. Yes, he says, because it feels like James is waiting for some kind of response, and that's all he has. Truthfully, he'd forgotten about his hair. He'd been avoiding mirrors lately, avoiding being confronted with his own face. It's easier that way. I like it. James smiles. He's being nice. Regulus knows what it looks like. Severe, cold, bare. James steps forward, Regulus having positioned himself at the back wall, across from the door. Can I... No. The word is out of Regulus so fast he can barely believe he's said it, and instantly James stops, hands dropping to his sides. He looks the way he always does. Perfect. Hair a mess, glasses smudged. Perfect. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. Okay, James says, clearly trying to recover. This is no doubt not the reunion he thought he was going to be getting. Regulus knows that he's hurting him, knows that he shouldn't have come. James leans against the back of the sofa. You have a good Christmas? He asks tentatively. Regulus wants to laugh. He doesn't. Sure, it was fine. Yours? It's hard to concentrate. It's been hard to concentrate all day, maybe longer than that. It's always been a bit of a culture shock returning to school after being at Grimmauld Place, but this is next level. You hid too much of yourself this time, says the voice in his head. He thinks it's probably right. Reg? The last time I saw you, I was happy. Regulus? The last time I saw you, my mother was trying to rip you out of my head. Regulus? James repeats his name for a third time, louder now and afraid. It's clear that he's been speaking and Regulus hasn't heard a word of it. Sorry. The shaking has started, and it's work to keep it out of his voice. I'm not feeling well. He can see how desperately James wants to close the space between them, but he doesn't. Doesn't take a single step. Do you want me to take you to the infirmary? You can't take me to the infirmary, because someone might see us. He lets remain unsaid, his voice verging on cruel. He hates it, but he doesn't stop it. No one's gonna see us at this hour. Regulus shakes his head. You don't know that. Besides, I don't want to go to the infirmary anyway. I just want to go back to my room. I just want to sleep. Pain, imperfectly suppressed by James Potter's beautiful face. I've been in love with you since I was 11 years old, he thinks. Okay, James says eventually, if that's what you want. Regulus nods, letting them stay in tense silence only a minute longer before he somehow manages to force his legs to move. He doesn't look at James. Reg? Part of him doesn't want to stop. He's so close to being out of here, so close to being free of the growing ache in his chest, of the cracking in his bones. But he does stop, looking behind him to find James unmoved, face broken open. I missed you. He gives him a weak smile, and Regulus feels his hand tighten around the doorknob in front of him in an attempt to stay standing. I'll see you tomorrow, is all he says, not waiting to see what effect those words have on James before he throws himself into the hallway. He just needs to get back to his room. He just needs to close his eyes. He just needs to not be awake for a little bit. Regulus shoves his hands in his pockets as he moves through the hallways, steps determined, focused. Inhale, exhale. Nothing matters. If nothing matters, then nothing hurts. Black, fancy seeing you here. Regulus's steps stutter, but don't stop. He knows that voice, knows it without even looking at it. Well, that's not very polite. Severus Snape falls into step beside him. Following me now, are you? Regulus demands through clenched teeth, eyes very determinedly forward as he makes a conscious effort to keep his breath at a reasonable pace. Actually, I had other business to attend to, but 2 birds, 1 stone. This seemed like an excellent opportunity to remind you of that favor you still owe me. I don't owe you shit, Regulus growls, too tired for this, too broken for this. I think you'll find that's not true, unless you want a certain rumor going around. Regulus sighs. Please, enough of your empty threats. You're not going to tell anyone anything. I wouldn't be so sure. Regulus stops so abruptly that Snape nearly trips over himself trying to do the same. You want in, Snape, huh? You want in on the cause? You want to run around with Mosber and Avery and call yourself a Death Eater? Then I would watch your fucking mouth around me. Snape looks back at him, clearly taken off guard, and Regulus sneers in a way he knows makes him look like his mother. You are no one, Regulus pushes, feeling the anger and the fear and the pain of the last 2 weeks straining against his skin. Your mother is no one. Your muggle father is no one. You think they'll let you join without the help of people like me? He laughs and doesn't recognize the sound of his own voice. When you have blood thicker than the mud blood you can't get to fuck you? It happens fast. 1 minute they're facing each other, and the next, Snape has him pressed up against the wall. Whatever was holding Regulus together snaps then. Like a dam, it all comes crashing forth. Everything he'd been trying to keep controlled, keep buried. And he can't breathe. He can't breathe. He tries, but nothing is working. Inhale, inhale. Come on, inhale. But he's 11 years old, and Roger Flint is crushing him. Inhale, inhale, inhale. He's trapped in his bedroom, Lucius Malfoy's foot on his chest. Inhale, inhale, inhale. He knows that Snape is talking, spitting venom in his face, but Regulus can't hear him. He wonders if anyone has died like this before, because their heart just gave up. Oi, get the fuck off him. The second that Snape's grip is pried from his shoulders, he collapses, legs unable to support him. But nothing changes. The horrible feelings clawing at his skin, the pain that hurts so much more now. It doesn't go away. Inhale, inhale, inhale. Bellatrix is in his head. He can't move. He can't blink. His mother is flipping through his memories. His brother is walking out the door. Inhale, inhale, inhale. What's going on here? He's vaguely aware of the third voice, vaguely aware that something has been going on around him. Bodies, spells, feet shuffling on stone floor. He's rocking back and forth, nails digging into his knees. Does he know that this is what you're really like? Lucius asks. A worm? Pathetic and groveling and used? Inhale, inhale, inhale. He'll figure it out eventually, what a sad little thing you are, and I can't imagine he'll want you after that. Inhale, inhale, inhale. There's talking, voices. He knows there is. He doesn't know what they're saying, though. Doesn't think it matters. What can they do to him? What else can they do? Regulus? James comes into view, kneeling in front of him, hands held out but not touching. He can feel his magic. He can always feel his magic. Sweet and warm, it curls around him but doesn't squeeze. Regulus tries to hold on to that, tries to use it as a rope to pull himself out of whatever hole he's fallen into. But it doesn't work. Regulus, I need you to breathe, okay? His eyes are pleading, and it's not until that moment that Regulus realizes that he's been hearing James Potter's voice in his head the whole time. Inhale, exhale. He opens his mouth to speak, but he can't, so he just shakes his head, squeezing his eyes shut. It's okay. You're okay. And Regulus wonders how he manages to say it without choking. So, it turns out my mom knows about Patroclus and Achilles, James goes on, his voice low, calm, just talking. Don't ask me how. She's a bit mad like that. I'm pretty sure she knows everything, honestly. Anyway, I started reading the Iliad, which I thought was going to be a bit more, soppy, but it's mostly a bunch of guys killing each other. Not that I'm complaining. Something comes out of Regulus that's almost a laugh. He doesn't know if he's crying. He hopes that he's not. And, obviously, I'm all for the Greeks, but I've gotta be honest, I kinda like Hector. Now, Regulus actually does laugh, wet and rough as it is. His eyes open and the world is blurry. So he is crying then. Of course you like Hector. And oh, how James smiles at that, slow and soft. There you are, he almost whispers. Regulus realizes that it's true. He's shaking and crying and not all that confident that he can stand up, but he's breathing again. Thank Merlin, he's breathing again. Mr. Potter. The voice makes Regulus look up, a wave of nausea washing over him as he sees Filch and Snape standing there. Snape's nose bleeding, his shirt collar torn. Take Mr. Black to the infirmary and then get back to your dorm, Filch continues. I'll be telling McGonagall and Slughorn all about this. No doubt I'll see you in detention tomorrow evening. Yes, sir, James says, without hesitating, still crouched on the floor. Come on, you. Filch nudges Snape down the hall, Snape whose eyes have not stopped bouncing between James and Regulus. Go on, get! Filch gives him another push, and Snape reluctantly tears his eyes away from them, allowing himself to be nearly dragged into the direction of the Slytherin dorms. They're silent at first, listening as the footsteps grow distant down the hall. Regulus... But he cuts himself off when Regulus reaches forward, tugging on his shirt, pulling him close. Whoa, hey. There's some shuffling. James moving so his back is against the wall, pulling Regulus into his lap like a little kid. But he doesn't care, pressing his face into James's chest. I'm sorry, he mutters, voice still rough. I'm sorry. Shh, hey, no, it's okay, Reg. You're okay. And none of that is true, but he doesn't bother trying to correct him. James runs his hand soothingly up and down Regulus's back, kissing the top of his head. This okay? He asks, and Regulus nods. We're in the hallway, he says stupidly, but James seems to understand. Regulus feels him shuffling underneath him, pulling out his wand, he thinks. A few seconds later, something is draped over their heads. Regulus blinks, looking up. Did you just cover us with a cloak? James nods. Invisibility cloak. Regulus stares at him. You have an invisibility cloak? Surprise! Regulus shakes his head, pressing his face back into James's shirt. Magic map, invisibility cloak? You're ridiculous. James laughs softly. So I've been told. It's warm in James's arms, so they stay like that. Regulus unwilling to move. James probably afraid to. Eventually, Regulus hears himself whisper, "She cut my hair." He thinks he might be crying again. He doesn't know why. James nods. It'll grow back. He presses another kiss to the top of Regulus's head. Besides, I told you. I like it. Very badass. Regulus half sniffles, half laughs. Ridiculous. Chapter endnotes. I love this chapter, but I'm also nervous about it, so hopefully it wasn't too much. I just can't imagine living in the house to be anything but traumatizing. Plus, I feel like it makes Regulus make more sense as a character. Also, I hear you guys with the happy ending. I do, really, but I can't promise you that. This fic is going to be pretty canon compliant. That being said, I can promise you that they definitely don't hate each other at the end of this, and that they both, know that, if that makes sense. Anyways, thanks for the comments. Chapter 11. James knows he's overprotective. Really, he does. He's not sure why, not sure where it comes from. He's never lost anyone, never had anyone walk away from him. He hasn't lived through what Sirius has, but Remus has. There's no reason for him to have this deep need to protect when nothing has ever really been taken from him. But he does. If you want it to be cute, and sometimes his mother does, you could call it the Gryffindor in him. But it's more than that. It scares him sometimes, if he's honest. It's too intense. He feels it about Sirius, about Remus, about Peter. This need to be at their sides, to make sure that they're okay, to destroy anything and anyone who tries to touch them, because they're his. His to protect, his to keep, his to love. It's too much. He knows it is. It's worse with Regulus. He doesn't like Snape. Whatever Lily says, he doesn't see much that's redeemable about the kid. But he's glad Filch showed up when he did, glad that he pulled them apart, because, for a minute, when he came around that corner, when he saw Snape with Regulus pressed against the wall, he doesn't actually think he was going to kill him. He hopes he wasn't. But Merlin, he wanted to. He felt the need burn under his skin. He wouldn't have needed magic, wouldn't have needed a wand. He'd have done it with his bare hands. And that scares him. Scares him almost as much as the way Regulus shakes in his arms, the way he cries silently into his chest. James has never felt his age quite so much as when he was crouched on the floor, trying to get Regulus to breathe. All he could think was, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Someone help. Someone get my mom. It hurts. People hurt, even when they don't mean to, even when it isn't their fault. It hurts to see Remus mourning after a full moon, which is a selfish thing to feel or to think, but it's true. It hurts to see him broken and battered and filled with loneliness, just like it hurt to watch Regulus fall apart. He knows it isn't about him. None of it is, but it hurts like it's his, and he's sorry. He wishes he was stronger, wishes he was more, wishes he wasn't the only person he knew who wasn't covered in scars. We're going to have to move, Regulus says eventually, still pressed against him, invisibility cloak over their heads. James's arms instinctively tighten around him. Let's go back to the room. Can we do that? He realizes he shouldn't be making demands right now, but the idea of letting Regulus go back to that dorm, the idea that Snape might be waiting for him. Filch might check the room if you went back to your dorm. James shakes his head. I already got one detention. Another won't make much of a difference. Regulus is quiet. I'm asking, Reg, James says gently. It's a question. You can say no. You can always say no. He knows he's handled things wrong before. Knows he looked disappointed when Regulus turned him away. He's never been good at guarding his emotions. He hates that he did that he made him think, even for a minute, that he had to do anything he didn't want to. I know, Regulus whispers back, before burrowing further into James's chest. His hand goes to the back of his head, holds him there. I love you. I love you. I'm so sorry that I wasn't there. I'm so sorry that someone hurt you and I couldn't stop it. I'm so sorry that I don't know what to do. Okay, Regulus says finally. Okay, let's go. Yeah? James tries to keep the relief out of his voice. Yeah. Yes. Yes, James. It's a slow process, getting Regulus back on his feet. James suggests carrying him, but Regulus sends him a look so sharp James can't believe he isn't bleeding from it. He keeps one hand around Regulus's waist and the other holding up the invisibility cloak, even though it doesn't quite cover their feet. He figures some coverage is better than none, and he is not at all certain that Filch isn't coming back. By the time they make it to the room, he thinks they're both exhausted. He tosses the cloak over a nearby chair, Regulus collapsing into the bed, leaving James standing awkwardly by the door. He wants desperately to be closer, but knows better than to move. He may not understand where it comes from, Regulus's fear of hands and bodies and touch, but he knows that Regulus hates it, and that he's almost ashamed of it, and that he'll let James cross boundaries if he pushes. Clearly, it's something Regulus has grown used to. So James is so careful not to push. Do you have practice tomorrow morning? He asks finally. Regulus shakes his head, still lying on his back. No. You? Course. Frank's a complete tyrant. Please, you love it. Maybe, James admits, feeling shaky even as they fall into familiar patterns. But I don't want him to know that. No, I suppose not. There's another pause, the fire burning low, somehow anticipating their level of exhaustion. I'll sleep on the sofa, yeah? James? He knows that tone. Hears the pain in it, the fear. It's all right, Reg. I don't mind. Really. Regulus sighs. Has it ever occurred to you that you should mind? That you should want more? More than... No. James cuts him off, voice steady. It hasn't. Regulus lets out another sigh, kicking his shoes off before wiggling so that he's sitting up against the headboard. He looks exhausted, like he hasn't slept the entire time he was gone. There are craters hanging under his eyes, his skin pale, his hands unable to stay still, constantly fidgeting in his lap or with his sleeve. Okay, the sofa, but can you come here first? He looks nervous when he says it. When James had walked in here the first time, it had been hard not to react to the boy in front of him. Regulus had been swaying against the back wall, eyes barely able to focus, body held so tightly James was afraid he was going to snap. At least now he's present, but it's all laced with a new kind of fear, one that's closer to the surface. Sure, Reg. He sits on the side of the bed, leaving space between them. After a few moments, Regulus reaches out, playing with James's fingers, slowly, carefully. James doesn't move. What happened? Regulus says finally, not looking up from their hands. With Snape, I didn't really see. James blinks, surprised by the question, really feeling that he ought to be the one asking. I heard you two arguing, or, well, I heard Snape anyway. He wasn't exactly keeping his voice down. So I followed the noise, and when I found you, he had you pinned against the wall. Regulus's hand stills, and James feels the anger fresh again, the desire to rip Snape to shreds. So I pulled him off you, and he took a swing at me. Regulus looks up at that, squinting. He hit you? James snorts. Not very well. Snivelus has never excelled at physical altercations. You would know, I guess. James nods noncommittally. Anyway, I hit him back, somewhat more effectively. I noticed. And James thinks he catches the hint of a smile in Regulus's mouth. Mostly we just shoved each other around a bit. He shot off a spell at some point, but it missed by a mile. Regulus doesn't respond right away, still playing with James's fingers. I think he knows, he says eventually. James raises his eyebrows. Knows? About us. Is that why you two got into it? Regulus forces a breath out of his nose. No, that was... Well, anyway. The way he was looking at us when Filch dragged him off, I think he knows. I don't know, it's not like we were snogging or anything. We weren't behaving platonically. James makes a scoffing noise. I mean, we could have been. I'd have helped any of my friends out the same. Gray eyes look up, tired. But we're not friends. James doesn't have an answer for that. Doesn't even know where to start. Eventually, Regulus sighs, pulling his hand back into his own lap. I'm just warning you, because if I were Snape, the first person I would go to would be Sirius. James doesn't miss the way his voice frays on his brother's name. He still doesn't know what the right thing to say here is, what it is that Regulus wants to hear. It'll be his word against ours. He hasn't got any way to prove it. Regulus leans back against the headboard, breathing in and out the way he does sometimes, like he has to think about it. Since when do you need proof to spread a rumor at this school? And before James can answer, he goes on. Besides, that's why he'll go to Sirius. He won't need to prove it. He'll just need to make Sirius doubt you. Which he will. James hates this conversation. Will he? A bit defiantly. Regulus rolls his head sleepily toward him, eyes opening again. Yes, it's what we do. Doubt and doubt and doubt. Everything gets all twisted in that house. Love and hate and all the rest. You can't trust anyone. Can't even trust yourself. James aches for the both of them. He wishes that he could fix it, that he could stop them from ever being hurt at all. He trusts me, James says finally, voice weak. Regulus nods. And you're lying to him. James feels the air escape from his lungs like he's just been hit. He's not entirely sure he hasn't been. He makes to stand up, but Regulus's hand shoots out, wrapping around his wrist. Sleepy eyes suddenly wide. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that. I'm not, he fumbles with his words. I'm not very good right now. I'm all the worst parts of me. I'm sorry. James breathes in, trying to put out the fires those words started in his chest, because he hadn't thought about it like that. Not really. Not fully. He knows that he's one of the few people that Sirius trusts, that he's ever trusted, but it never occurred to him before that he wasn't worthy of it. Regulus is still staring at him with frightened eyes. It's okay, Reg. It's not. It was just the truth. But the younger boy shakes his head. I was being cruel. I told you I'm not very nice. I try to be. For you. He grimaces at the confession. I'm the one that made you promise not to tell anyone. It isn't fair for me to throw it back in your face. Regulus, he says softly, holding the other boy's eyes. You don't have to be nice all the time, you know. Nobody is. Regulus looks at him skeptically. Says you. I'll have you know there are plenty of people who think I'm an asshole. This doesn't seem to sway Regulus. They think you're an idiot. There's a difference. James laughs, probably too loud, but it melts some of the ice in Regulus's eyes, so he doesn't feel too bad about it. You might be right. I am. Regulus looks down at where he's still holding on to James's wrist, and then, slowly and almost painfully sweet, he brings James's knuckles to his mouth and kisses them. It's soft and quick, like something he wanted so badly he couldn't help it. His cheeks are slightly pink when he puts James's hand back down again. James wonders how it is that Regulus can be so forward about so much else and so unsure of the littler things, like this. I should let you sleep, he says eventually, breathless, heart trying to slip between his ribs. There are so many words crowding behind Regulus's lips. He can see them, see Regulus swallow them down. He wishes that just once he wouldn't, that just once he would tell James all the things he thinks are too terrible to utter, the parts of him too ugly to show. I can take it, James wants to say. Trust me. Thank you, Regulus says finally, voice quiet. For what? The younger boy shakes his head. All of it? Everything? They watch one another for too long before James eventually gets to his feet. He reaches a hand out, slowly, pausing before they touch. Can I? There's a moment of hesitation before Regulus nods. Yes, he says softly. James holds his face, her thumbs brushing over his cheeks as Regulus closes his eyes, leaning into the touch. James bends forward and presses a kiss to the top of his head before pulling away. I'm not going anywhere, Regulus. The younger boy blinks his eyes open, so serious and stoic. I know, he says, though the pause gives him away. I mean it. Regulus looks almost sad for a minute before he's able to wipe his expression clean, neutral. I know you do. He considers pushing the matter, but decides against it. Not tonight. Good night, Reg. Good night, James. James is slightly better at sneaking back into his dorm, using the invisibility cloak to make sure he gets upstairs unseen. Unfortunately, Sirius is already awake for Quidditch, and there isn't really a subtle way for James to just appear. Sirius doesn't seem surprised when James takes off the invisibility cloak. He just gives him a cold once-over from where he's sitting on his bed. James tries to explain. Better hurry up. Sirius gets to his feet, grabbing his broom. Don't want to keep Frank waiting. With that, he brushes past him and out of the room, shutting the door a bit too forcefully considering their other two roommates are still sleeping. Sirius gives James a silent treatment for the rest of the morning, which James thinks is a little unfair, but he tries to ignore it. All he gets is glowering and grumbling and sarcastic huffs every time he opens his mouth. By the end of breakfast, he's about ready to throttle Sirius. Luckily, Remus, being the perceptive lad he is, makes sure to sit between them in charms and then again in potions. By lunch, things are actually starting to feel a little more relaxed. That is, until James hears the unmistakable sound of McGonagall clearing her throat. Professor, he says, resigned, putting down his sandwich and turning toward her. Really, Potter, fighting in the corridor in the middle of the night. James can feel the eyes of each of his friends boring into him, Sirius's especially. What on earth possessed you to act so foolishly? After an extended silence, James realizes that she actually expects an answer from him. I was sleepwalking? She arches a formidable eyebrow. Really? And you just happened to sleepwalk right into Mr. Snape? James rubs the back of his neck. Yeah, mad coincidence, that. She says, eyes running him up and down, clearly unimpressed. A week's detention? Oh, come on. And 10 points from Gryffindor. Professor, you know Slughorn's not going to take anything from Slytherin for this. She sniffs. How my fellow professors deal with their houses is none of my business. You, Mr. Potter, ought to know better. You're in 5th year, for goodness sake. James doesn't understand how that's relevant to anything, but he can't see the point in trying to fight with her. Your detention starts tonight, after supper, 6:30. Filch will be waiting for you in the trophy room. You are to be punctual and contrite. Have I made myself clear? Yes, Professor, he grumbles, turning back to his sandwich. Oh, and Mr. Potter. He looks up as she calls to him over her shoulder. If this happens again, I promise you the consequences will be far more severe. James rolls his eyes, though only once he's sure she's no longer looking. Brilliant. It takes him a minute to realize that the other 3 marauders are all still staring at him, and he tries to figure out if there's any way he can avoid having the conversation that is clearly coming. You got in a fight with Snape? Remus hisses. Apparently not. James looks up guiltily at the confused faces of his friends. Well, Remus and Peter look confused. Sirius looks angry. Sort of, he answers eventually. Yeah. Sort of? Peter repeats. James shrugs. Don't know why you're acting like this is some big deal. We get into scrapes with Snivellus all the time. Not usually in the middle of the night, Remus says, not unfairly. Yeah, well, what can I say? The bloke's a tool 24/7. Ain't no rest for the wicked, eh? He tries to smile, but doesn't appear to appease a single one of his friends. What the hell were you even doing out of bed? Peter asks, looking the most genuinely confused of the bunch. James shrugs again, looking down at his plate. Walking? That earns him a cold laugh from Sirius, who pushes away from the table muttering something that sounds a lot like unbelievable under his breath. Pads? Remus calls after him, but Sirius is already walking away, without a backwards glance. James watches him. He must have forgotten something in the room, Remus says, eyeing James nervously. James stares for a moment longer before dropping his eyes. Yeah, must have. Sirius's mood continues for the rest of the day, and it's for that reason that instead of going back to the dorms after class, James decides to go to the library. Maybe giving him some space will help. Besides, if he has to listen to Sirius sigh one more time, he's going to lose it. Marlene and Lily are already there, Remus having promised to be along later after grabbing some books from upstairs. James stews over his coursework, not really paying attention to anything he's reading, mind preoccupied with the Black brothers. He wonders how Regulus is getting on. He didn't see him at breakfast, and Regulus was still asleep when James left this morning. He wasn't sure if he should wake him up or not, but decided against it. If anyone needs an extra hour or two of shut-eye, it's Reg. Sirius is a whole other problem. It's clear that James can't keep shutting him out like this. Sirius won't stand for it, and even though he's being a complete wanker at the moment, James knows it's fair. Knows he'd probably be just as bad. But what other option does he have? Oi, Earth to Potter! Lily snaps her fingers in front of his face, pulling him out of his thoughts. Damn, Evans, we're in the library. Tone it down a bit. She blinks back at him, then elbows Marlene beside her. Mar, did you hear that? Marlene, who is still scribbling out her potions essay, nods. Sure did. Lily turns back to him, biting her lips to hold in a smile. I don't understand what's so funny here. He looks between the two girls, not at all in the mood for mind games. You just told me to tone it down, Lily says, as though that ought to make everything clear. Yeah? You, she repeats, openly smiling now. You, James Potter, king of loud, over-the-top wankers. Oi! Okay, I'm not that bad. You just told me to tone it down. He gives her a flat look. You're enjoying this far too much, Evans. Pretty sure I'm enjoying it the exact right amount. He snorts, shaking his head as he looks back down at his textbook. That must be some page there, Lily goes on, still smiling. He'd be more annoyed if it wasn't so fucking charming. What are you on about now? She nods down at the page in front of him. Just that you've been reading that same section for the past 30 minutes. He blinks, looks down at the page, and then back up again. Maybe I'm just a very slow reader. Ever consider that? Please, I've seen you read 12 times, James. He grins out of the corner of his mouth. You been watching me, Evans? She rolls her eyes, but he's pleased to see pink stains on the tops of her cheeks. We've been in school together for 5 years. I've seen you read. A likely story. So, she goes on, ignoring him, what is it that's got you so preoccupied you can't get through a single paragraph? He meets her green eyes across the table and thinks, not for the first time, that this lying business is really rather exhausting, and he has no idea how Slytherins manage it. I don't know, he sighs, running a hand through his hair. She sends him a pointed look that makes it clear that that will not be enough for her. So he decides to give in a little. Sirius is upset with me. Oh no, trouble in paradise? He doesn't particularly appreciate her joking tone. Yeah, a bit. She leans forward across the table, expression becoming slightly more sincere. Did you have a fight? And how does he even answer that? Merlin, maybe. I can't tell. She arches her brow. I'm sorry, you can't tell? Marlene snorts beside her. Boys, she says disparagingly. Hey, it's complicated, okay? Somehow, I doubt that. Mar, stop antagonizing him. Lily elbows her again, holding back a smirk. Go on, Potter. You don't know if you and your best mate have had a fight? Well, we did have a fight, he tries to explain, not at all sure why he's bothering. But we were fine afterwards. You made up? She asks. What? No, we just pretended it never happened. She blinks slowly. Ah, I see. You were... She makes air quotes with her fingers. Fine. Honestly, you lot are way less sympathetic than I thought you would be. James crosses his arms over his chest and slouches in his seat. Sorry. She shakes out her shoulders. Sympathetic Lily in the house. So, you ignored all your feelings, dealt with nothing, and now it's coming back to bite you in the ass? James glares at her across the table. That didn't sound very sympathetic. Didn't it? She asks innocently, and when he continues to pout, she sighs. Listen, here's what it comes down to. Did you do something wrong? James' stomach squirms. Yeah, he says reluctantly. So, apologize. Oh, brilliant advice, that. Well, she looks at him expectantly. Have you tried it? James grinds his teeth. No, he forces out eventually. You might want to. He sighs, running a hand over his face. It's not that simple. He doesn't want an apology. He wants me to fix it, which is as close to the truth as James is going to get. Lily looks at him, eyes searching his face for a moment before she speaks again. And you can't? Don't want to? James lets out a breath. I'm scared, more like. Okay, that's as close to the truth as he's going to get. She nods slowly. Well, have you tried telling him that? He opens his mouth, finds he has nothing to say, and closes it again. That hadn't actually occurred to him. After a few moments of watching him flounder, Lily leans forward again, placing her hand on his arm, which feels weird. Nice, but weird. Listen, I'm not saying I'm an expert or anything, but I'm pretty sure even the giant squid knows how much Sirius Black loves you. So, whatever you did, I bet you anything he wants to forgive you more than he wants to be angry with you. Besides, she pulls back, it's a bit sad, one of you without the other. You're really better as a pair. James snorts. I'm gonna try and not take that as an insult. Good. It wasn't meant as one. He nods, scrubbing at his face before meeting her gaze again. You're right. I know you are. I'm bloody miserable without the wanker. She smiles, a little more softly than he would have accepted. What? Nothing. She shakes her head, still smiling. Just, it's sweet, is all. James pulls a face that makes her laugh. I'm just saying. However annoying you lot are, minus Remus, of course. Of course, James agrees. I've always said Remus is my best quality. She smirks. However annoying, she continues, the way you look after each other. It's always been, I don't know, the most human thing about you. Human? James asks. You thought I was inhuman? Sometimes. There were a few years there where you felt more like a cartoon character than a person. All those bloody proposals. James grimaces. Oh, yeah. Those. Those. He rubs the back of his neck, fidgeting uncomfortably. Suppose I owe you an apology for some of them. She arches her brow. Are you sure you don't want to just act like they never happened? Her voice is dripping in sarcasm. Marlene snorts, as if any of us could ever forget. James glares at her, even though she's not looking up to see it. Thanks, Mar. Big help you are. Anytime, Potter. James exhales, turning back to Lily, who watches him expectantly. He coughs, clearing his throat. Well, for what it's worth, I am sorry. About most of them. Most? She repeats. Well, not the first one. She arches her brow. But the rest of them? He shrugs. It kind of became expected, didn't it? Couldn't let my audience down. He sees the familiar expression of anger pinching her face, and when she speaks again, her voice is brittle. And what about me, then? James ducks his head sheepishly. Yeah, I know, it wasn't fair. You got lost a bit, ironically, in the show of it. It just took me a while to really figure that out. That I'd stopped doing it for you. Stopped thinking about you at all, really. He expects her to get angry, but she doesn't. Just watches him. He feels uncomfortable, but he does his best to bear it, to let her get out whatever it is that she needs to. If not yelling, he at least expects a dressing down. Lily is rather famously good at those. But the next words out of her mouth are not what he expects. But the first one, she says slowly. You thought about me then? Yeah, and he doesn't know why that feels important, but it does. You were all I thought about, really. There's a moment of silence then, both of them looking at each other for the first time with the past laid out in front of them. Eventually, James can't take it anymore. Well, he says, suddenly feeling antsy. Better get back to... He gestures to the book in front of him. Right. Lily seems to shake herself awake. Right, yeah. He tries to concentrate. Really. But he never does get past that page. James is not new to detention. In fact, he's a rather old hat at it. Usually it involves cleaning. On occasion, when McGonagall is feeling particularly spiteful, it also includes essay writing. Something about making him think about his actions and consider the consequences and blah, blah, blah. Honestly, all things considered, dusting and polishing old trophies is one of the better options. So James is feeling in relatively good spirits as he strolls up to the dusty room on the east wing of the dungeons. That is, until he remembers who he's gotten himself in trouble with. Oh, fuck, he mutters under his breath as Snape skulks down the corridor toward him. James turns to the caretaker. I would rather you hang me from the ceiling by my toes than spend the next 3 hours with that tosser. Filch seems almost wistful. If only, my boy, if only. He pulls out a set of jangly keys from his pocket and unlocks the door, whispering something about ministry guidelines and a little bit of torture never hurt anyone, which James doesn't think is strictly true. He follows Filch into the room, very pointedly not looking at Snape, who has come up behind him. The door is barely closed before James has a rag and spray bottle thrown in his face. He decides to let it go, however, because Filch does the same thing to Snape, who makes an affronted squeaky noise that James wishes he had recorded. You, Filch points at James, start at that end. And you, he turns to Snape, that one. He gestures to the opposite end of a long, slender room, which is made up almost entirely of shelves. What all these trophies are for, James hasn't the foggiest. He's done this once or twice before. A lot of them are Quidditch. Some of them are for academics or sports that James has never heard of and clearly went out of fashion centuries ago. Some are inscribed in Latin, so honestly it's anyone's guess. Wands, Filch holds out his hand. Wands? Snape demands indignantly. James just rolls his eyes, pulling his out of his pocket and handing it over. There's no magic allowed in detention, Phil says with a leer, motioning to Snape with his fingers. Now, hand it over. Snape scowls back at the man, seemingly trying to decide whether or not he actually has to listen to him. James sighs, leaning against the shelves behind him. It's a rookie move, honestly, getting Filch riled up. Do you want me to be fetching McGonagall, telling her you aren't complying, huh? If anything, Snape's scowl seems to deepen. She's not my head of house. Didn't say she was. James snorts and then quickly tries to cover it with a cough as Filch looks over at him suspiciously. There's no getting on the caretaker's good side. There's only staying off his bad one, and James has always managed that balancing act rather well. Eventually, with a dramatic sigh, Snape hands over his wand. All right, then. You lot get to work. I'll be back in an hour to check on your progress. You're just going to leave us? Snape demands, outraged. Filch smiles. Don't worry. You needn't be afraid. Mrs. Norris will be here to watch you. Won't you, sweetheart? There's a sound of purring before the feline emerges from beneath a stack of trophies on the floor, winding her way around the caretaker's legs. James does his best to repress a shiver. He's always hated that cat. Now, if you want to get out of here before midnight, I suggest you start polishing. James kicks himself upright, happy to put some distance between himself and Snape as he walks to the other end of the room. He polishes a few trophies the Muggle way, keeping an eye on Mrs. Norris and the back of Snape's head. But once he's certain that neither of them can see him, he slides Peter's wand out of his sleeve. This isn't James's first rodeo, and he absolutely refuses to be stuck in this miserable room all night. With a quick flick of his wand, the trophies closest to him start to sparkle, and James smiles. My, Potter, aren't you quick, Filch mutters an hour later when James has nearly half the room done without breaking a sweat. Lots of practice, sir, he smiles. Filch does not smile back, his sneering gaze moving over to Snape, whose normally gray face is flushed and sweaty and made even uglier by the intense anger James can see bubbling beneath it. You, on the other hand, Filch looks at Snape's pitiful pile of polished trophies. James reckons he could do twice that many even if he wasn't cheating. Pick up the pace, boy. I'll be back again in an hour, and I expect you to have done more than that. He all but spits on the floor next to him. There's little that bothers Filch quite as much as poor housekeeping. He gives Mrs. Norris a scratch on the head before trudging out of the room. James turns back to the shelves behind him. Unfortunately, now that he's no longer hidden away in his corner, he'll have to start doing them by hand. Still, he's managed to make an impressive dent if he does say so himself. How the hell did you get through those so fast? Demands an irate Snape from beside him. James lets out a long-suffering sigh. He is also now, unfortunately, much closer to his detention partner. Listen, Snivellus. He looks over at Snape, whose rag is curled in his fist, as though it has personally offended him. It's not my fault that you're crap at everything. Snape lets out an indignant noise, like a tea kettle that's just come to boil, and James can't help but laugh, bending down to pick up his next trophy. Prefect of the Year is scrawled across it, and James has half a mind to nick it for Remus. Never would have pegged you for a queer, Potter. He hears the words come out of Snape's mouth in a hiss, and feels himself pause. It's the first time anyone's ever called him that, and he expected to feel more. More about the disgust in Snape's tone. But maybe it's because it's Snape, pathetic and grasping as he is, that it makes it almost laughable instead. He looks over at the other boy, expression flat. Sorry, did you say something? You'll have to speak up. I'm not fluent in asshole. Snape's eyes narrow. Tell me, Potter, does your friend know you're fucking his brother? Do you know that I'm fucking his brother? James asks, feeling the weight of Peter's wand up his sleeve and struggling to find the willpower not to use it. Because I don't actually think you do. That's just the baseless conclusion that you've drawn in that tiny little brain of yours. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to get back to polishing so that I can get the hell out of here. Snape opens his mouth to speak, but James cuts him off. Great. Glad we're on the same page. He very purposefully turns away from him, scrubbing rather unfairly at the trophy in his hands. A few moments of silence pass, and James starts to think that he might actually be able to get through the rest of the night without having to speak to Snape again. Of course, Snape has other plans. That's the second time you've come to his rescue, he says. Good to know you can count. James does not look up from his cleaning. Bit hypocritical of you, don't you think? James hates that he can feel himself taking the bait, responding to the infuriatingly smug tone that Snape's voice has taken on. Whatever are you talking about, Severus? He asks, forcing a brevity into his words that he does not feel. James Potter, defender of half-bloods and muggleborns, protecting Regulus Black? Hardly adds up, does it? James grits his teeth. Shockingly, I don't really care what you think adds up. I bet I'm not the only one who would have a problem with it, even if you aren't fucking him. James very determinedly picks up another trophy, hoping Snape doesn't notice the way his hands shake with the barely refrained desire to punch him in his stupid mouth. People like Lily, for example. As someone who quite enjoys antagonizing people, James can recognize a trap when he sees one, and this one is oh so transparent. Unfortunately, that doesn't stop him from walking right into it. You just can't help yourself, can you? Says the voice in his head that sounds strangely like his mother. Oh, because you know Lily so well. I do. James snorts. Really? Because from what I hear, you two aren't so close anymore. And I don't know if you've noticed, Snivellus, but now at meals, she sits with me. Snape's mouth forms a firm line, and James is about to confidently turn back to his cleaning when... Did he tell you why we were fighting? That makes James pause, because, of course, he didn't. Which isn't unusual for Regulus. For every word he says, James knows there are a dozen he doesn't. Still, he can't quite bring himself to admit that to Snape, who seems to understand it anyway, smiling again. He called her a mudblood. He says it so casually that at first James doesn't quite understand it, can't take it in. What? He asks unwillingly. He doesn't want to play this game anymore. See? Snape sneers. Hypocrite. James throws the trophy in his hand to the side, causing it to crash into the pile behind him. Let me get this straight, he says, the anger now clearly humming under his words. He just walked up to you in the middle of the night and went, oh, hey, Severus, you know what, that Lily Evans? She's a... His voice cuts out, unable to finish that sentence. I'm supposed to believe that? Snape is clearly enjoying this. No. There was a bit more to it than that, though. I don't think you'd have liked any of the rest of it much better. A lot of boasting about his family and blood status. If memory serves, you've done worse than shove people into walls for that kind of thing. James has a rotting feeling growing in the pit of his stomach. Because Snape is right. And God, does he hate it. And you were, what, standing up for Muggle-Wizard equality? James asked coldly, doing his best to hide the tremor in his voice. Snape runs him up and down with his beady little eyes. Well, you certainly weren't. Fuck you. He wants to be able to say that he can't picture it. But the terrible truth is, he thinks that Reg might say those things if he was pushed, if he was angry. The rotting feeling grows. So, which is it, Potter? Snape asks with a sneer. Which side are you on? Well, I'm sure as fuck not on yours. Snape's black eyes glint viciously in the candlelight. Are you sure about that? Because I can promise you that Regulus certainly is. James is already in the come-and-go room when Regulus gets there. He came right from detention. He sits at the end of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped between them. He doesn't look up when Regulus comes in. Doesn't quite know how to handle himself. Oh, he hears Regulus stop. You're early? Yep. He doesn't want to be angry with Regulus. He doesn't want to believe Snape. He decides that if Regulus denies it, he'll let it go. He'll trust him. Because he does, doesn't he? Trust him? James? Regulus asks cautiously, still standing by the door. And James knows he's let the silence stretch on too long. With a sigh, he lifts his head, looking at Regulus and feeling the breath catch in his chest. I love you, I love you, I love you, he swallows with difficulty. Did you call Lily a mudblood? He usually avoids the word, but he doesn't want there to be any ambiguity here. Regulus blinks, surprised, and then nothing. A mask. Empty eyes stare back at him. He hates it. Yes. There's no inflection in his voice, and James feels something icy drip down his spine. Why? He practically whispers. Regulus looks back at him like he doesn't understand the question. Because she is one, he says simply. What? Unless I'm mistaken, she's Muggle-born, James interrupts, maybe more sharply than he means to, or maybe just as sharply as he means to. He can't decide. Regulus stares at him silently for a beat too long. I'm sorry, I don't see the difference. James's voice fails, and all he can do is gape at the boy in front of him. It's several moments before he seems to find himself again. You don't see the difference? He repeats, and when he gets no response, he runs a hand over his face. Reg, are you kidding me? They both mean the same thing. Bullshit. He's never raised his voice with Regulus before, and he sees the impact instantly, sees Regulus's walls go up, see his eyes go hard. That's bullshit, Regulus, and you know it. Once again, Regulus doesn't respond, standing there stiffly in the middle of the room. One of them is describing someone whose family doesn't have magic. James tries again, a little desperate now. The other is attacking them. Those two things are not the same. Still, nothing. Reg? He gets to his feet but doesn't move. Just trying to get some sort of response. Is any of this getting through to you? He sees Regulus's jaw clench, sees the struggle going on in his gray eyes. He just wishes he knew what it was about. I understand your words, he says carefully. It's the sentiment I'm struggling with. The sentiment? James repeats, uneasily. He can see Regulus's frustration before he hears it, though whether it's directed at James or himself, James can't tell. They don't have magic. They will never be us, be what we can be. James opens and closes his mouth several times before he manages to get something out. So what? Regulus's eyes narrow. So what? He repeats almost mockingly. What makes you think that we're the only thing worth being, or even the best thing? Look at this, Reg. He points up at the ceiling. You love this painting, this story. A wizard didn't come up with any of that. But when this room tried to give you the things you needed most, that's what it chose. Something Muggle. Regulus has his eyes on the painting. It looks like he's concentrating, trying to puzzle something out. James knows that this is what he's like, that he goes quiet, that he needs to take his time with things. James has to be patient. But right now, it feels as though his anxiety is going to break through his skin. He never really thought that Reg believed any of this. He was trapped in that house, trapped in Slytherin, but he wasn't one of them. Not really. Not his Reg. And right now, James needs him to prove it. Needs it desperately, because he can already feel the cracks in his heart, and he isn't sure if he can handle more. I never really thought of it like that, Regulus says finally, slowly. It's just always seemed magical to me. He shakes his head, eyes dropping back down. That sounds stupid, I'm sure. No, James thinks of that awe and wonder that has nothing to do with spells. Who says wizards are the only ones with magic? Regulus looks away from James and then back again, like he can't quite hold his gaze. I don't know how to see the world the way you do. No one's ever said anything like that to me, or around me. If they had, my mother probably would have dismembered them. James isn't sure how much of that is a joke. But you still snuck out to those Muggle museums, he prods gently. Regulus nods. I didn't really think about it at the time. I just wanted to. That's enough, James thinks. We can work with that. Reg, I get it. I do. But you can't go using that word, okay? You can't go around calling people, because if you do, then another sentence he can't finish. I just need you to promise, okay? James is losing the threads of his thoughts. All the things he knows need to be said, but that he doesn't know how to say. Regulus nods again, warily. Okay, if that's what you want. Which isn't exactly the enthusiastic response James was looking for, but he'll take it. For now. Promise? I promise, James. Gray eyes unwavering. And James trusts him. He trusts him. He trusts him. Doesn't he? He exhales a breath he wasn't aware he was holding, before extending his hand. A question. Regulus looks at it for a minute before walking forward, slotting his fingers between James's and allowing himself to be pulled in. Okay, James murmurs, resting his chin on Regulus's head. Okay. The boy is warm and soft in his arms, and it makes James' bones ache. It frightens him, how much he feels about Regulus, and he finds himself wondering, for the first time, if maybe it's wrong. Chapter endnotes. 2 things. 1. Okay, I don't want anyone selling organs or babies, so I have come up with an epilogue that I actually really like, and we'll end this story on a relatively nice-ish, sweet-ish, but still canon-compliant-ish note. How, you may ask? I guess you'll have to find out. 2. I also want to make it clear that when I say canon-compliant, I don't mean that I'm suddenly going to turn this into a Jilly fic, like Jilly is going to happen, but the focus is always going to be on James and Regulus. I don't know if this chapter really feels slow or if that's just me, but I promise it was necessary to set up. In the next 2 chapters, there's a lot more action/drama. It's really super fun and nice that you guys are so invested in these characters and what happens to them, and I love reading your opinions, so forever thank you. Chapter 12. Chapter notes. French translations will be in the endnotes. Trigger warning, referenced masked acts of violence. I am so sorry, I don't know how to trigger warning that. Dear James, I will try to refrain from nagging you too much about your horrendously sparse letters lately, but let me just remind you that I literally birthed you from my body, so you could perhaps put in a bit more effort, darling. I enclosed the jumper you asked for. It was curled in a heap under your bed, of course. Tell me, does Remus let you boys get away with such poor cleanliness in his room? Should I write him for tips? In any case, your father and I were both thrilled to hear about your win against Hufflepuff. He's thinking about coming down for your next match, so you'll have to let me know if that's an idea you'd like me to get out of his head. I know how very uncool having your parents doting on you can be. I should let you know. He's gotten out his old school scarf and Gryffindor jumper. Yes, the one with the roaring lion on the front. Ready to go just for the occasion. He's working quite a lot these days. I think he just wants something to look forward to. Not that I'm trying to guilt you into letting us come or anything. I, too, may have pulled my Gryffindor apparel from the basement, but that's purely a coincidence. Your cousin Daphne is having a baby. I can tell you're already pretending you don't know who she is, but I promise you've been introduced to her on several occasions. I'll be heading to Diagon Alley to pick up a present, and I was thinking I'd get some new trainers for you and Sirius. You two were both looking pretty ratty over Christmas, so you can expect those in the near future. You see, James Potter, this is a letter. Look at all those words. Don't you feel so much better informed now? I can feel our mother-son relationship strengthening with each sentence. Be warned, if you reply to me with 4 sentences or less, your father and I will be showing up to your Quidditch game and matching lion jumpers, whether you want us to or not. Give my love to Sirius and the boys. Sincerely, your gracious, youthful, and incredible mother. Mum, please, I'm begging you, anything but the lion jumper, anything. You can come, sure, but a little more chill about it, okay? Like maybe wear a trench coat, some hats, sunglasses. I'm just throwing out ideas here. Listen, it's not my fault life is dull. I'm doing all right in classes. Frank has us practicing twice a day at this point, the tyrant, but that's hardly new. Mostly everything is the same as it always is. Also, my room is not that messy. Me and Sirius are incredibly well-kept young gentlemen, I'll have you know. Well, I am anyway. And Remus is not the boss of us, but please don't tell him I said that. Have they got Dad working on the Dark Mark case? Is that why he's so busy? Bloody mad that was, how it just appeared like that in the middle of London. Do you know any more about what happened? Have they caught who did it? See, look, loads of words. Sincerely, the best son ever, James. A month after they got back from Christmas holidays, the image of a skull eating a snake is projected in the sky over downtown London. Clearly magical. Clearly in violation of just about every line of the Statute of Secrecy. The Aurors have to obliviate a ton of muggles and spread a fake news story about how it was promotion for some film or something. No one knows where it came from or what it means, and the Ministry has been infuriatingly tight-lipped. Of course, there are rumors that it's connected to Death Eaters, but they've never done anything like this before. Anything this big. Bullshit, Sirius mutters, crumpling up the Daily Prophet in his hands before incendioing it. Oi! Peter tries to lean away. You're getting ash in my eggs, he says, mouth full. Nothing? Again? James asks, not bothering to look up. What the hell are they playing at? Sirius demands indignantly, fist slamming down on the table so hard the cutlery rattles. How can they say nothing? How can they know nothing? It's been months at this point. I mean, don't we deserve some kind of, fucking explanation? It's strange for James to see the differences between Sirius and Regulus. When they first heard about the mark, Sirius got loud and angry and reckless. There have been lots of scuffles in the corridors. Not that James is in any position to criticize. He's been getting into a fair few fights of his own recently. But Reg got quiet. There were a few nights where they just lay next to each other, not touching, not talking. It should have been boring, frustrating, but it wasn't. It was nice to have him there, at James's side, even if he couldn't explain to James what he was feeling, even if he needed to disappear for a bit. Things are better now, but the same way that Sirius's anger lingers just under his skin, so does Reg's silence. They're hiding something. Remus speaks up, drawing James' attention across the table. You think someone in the Ministry has something to do with it? James asks, feeling a bit uneasy about that, seeing as his dad is part of the Ministry. Remus just shrugs. I think they fucked up, and now they're trying to fix it before they have to admit to that. Well, they're doing a shit job, Sirius growls. How hard can it be to find them? I mean, they were casting in the middle of London. Someone had to have seen them. Maybe they have found them, and they just don't want to release their names to the public, Remus says, pushing the food around on his plate. No, James says sternly. They wouldn't do that. No way. I'm just saying, the Death Eaters have a lot of sympathizers within the Ministry. What are you talking about? James doesn't know why this feels like a personal attack, but for some reason it does. The Minister of Magic has come out a dozen times renouncing them. He puts more Dementors on Azkaban to make sure the prisoners were secure. The Ministry does not support these assholes. Remus sighs, looking up from his plate. You know I'm not talking about your dad, right? Well, I don't know how you could not be, James says defensively. I'm just saying, he goes on, sounding a bit exasperated, that I don't think we can trust everything the Ministry tells us. I'm with Mooney, Sirius pipes up, and James turns to him with a look of betrayal on his face. I'm not talking about Fleamont, obviously, Sirius goes on, but my dad worked for the ministry too, and my cousin's awful husbands are working there now. The way I reckon it, the good guys are outnumbered. James officially hates this conversation. His eyes skate over to the Slytherin table. They stand out starkly from the rest of the hall. He's not saying it's all of them, not saying there aren't some Slytherins with tense faces and slouched shoulders. He's just saying it's a lot less than the rest of the school. James sighs, pushing his plate away and getting to his feet. Where are you going? Sirius asks. Class doesn't start for another half hour. James holds up the folded parchment in his hand. Gotta post a letter to my mom. I'll see you guys in Charms? Yeah, all right. James pats him on the shoulder, giving Peter and Remus a nod before heading out of the hall and toward the Owlry. Things are okay between him and Sirius. He's at least talking to James again, which is something, but there's an undeniable stiffness to their conversations. It makes James' skin crawl. He keeps telling himself to follow Lily's advice and apologize, or admit that he's scared. Say something, anything, but months have passed and he still hasn't. Tomorrow, he keeps telling himself. I'll do it tomorrow. The one upside to this, if there is any, is that it seems to have forced Sirius and Remus to come to some sort of agreement. James isn't exactly sure what it is. He just knows that the weirder things get between him and Sirius, the easier they seem to get with Sirius and Remus. He tries to think of it as a good thing. Tries not to be jealous. Tries not to hate Remus for it. So things are tense. Tense at school, tense outside school. You can feel it when you walk down the halls. Feel it in the whispered insults and rumors. Who cast the mark? Where are they? Why haven't they been caught? In the white faces of the first years, you see the other fear. Are they coming for us? Honestly, James is sick of it. So maybe that's why, on his way back from the owlery, when he spots a head of short black curls disappearing around the corner in front of him, he decides that Charms is not at all what he wants to be doing with his morning. Luckily, the corridor Regulus turns down is empty, and James settles himself against the wall, watching the back in front of him for a minute before letting out a whistle. Regulus looks over his shoulder, sees James, does a double take, then slows to a stop and turns around. He stands there for a few moments, seemingly unable to decide whether to be surprised or annoyed. Can I help you, Potter? He asks eventually. James smirks. I bet you can. He nods toward the door beside him and sees Regulus recognize it for what it is. A broom-covered, Potter. Really? How gauche of you. But he steps forward anyway, eyes darting around the hallway, checking that they're still alone. Broom cupboards are highly undervalued spaces, you know. Regulus arches his brow. Are they? Everyone always goes on and on about the towers and the Great Hall and the moving staircases, but when do they ever talk about the real backbone of this castle? The broom cupboards? He can see Regulus fighting off a smile, and it makes something warm pool in James's stomach. He opens the door, gesturing with a dramatic bow for Regulus to enter. The broom cupboards. As soon as the door closes behind them, Regulus drowns on James, sending him a pointed look. You going to tell me what the hell this is about? Regulus's hair is still short, but it's grown long enough that little curls have started to wisp around his ears and the back of his neck. James is a little obsessed with it, if he's being honest. James? Regulus asks, and James realizes he's been staring. Sorry, you're very distracting. He grins out of the corner of his mouth and watches Regulus blush even as he rolls his eyes. Yeah, what do you want? I just realized what day it is, that's all, James says, still grinning as he leans back against the door. Regulus looks at him flatly. It's Wednesday. Yes, it's the Wednesday I take you into the forest. There's a beat of silence. Have you lost your mind? Jury's out on whether I had one to begin with, James quips, and then, more sincerely, come on, Reg, it'll be fun. Besides, I have something I want to show you. Oh, well, in that case, he says sarcastically. James, I have transfiguration in 15 minutes. Ah, but what if you didn't, though? Regulus is apparently so outraged by this statement that all he can manage in response is a series of indignant noises that James has to try very hard not to laugh at. After enduring a few seconds of silent glaring, James holds out his hand and, reluctantly, Regulus allows himself to be pulled forward, pressing into James, who bends down, nosing at the spot just behind Regulus's ear. James's lips brush his skin, and he feels Regulus shiver. "Come on, Reg," he hums. "Break the rules for me." Regulus scoffs, but it lacks conviction. "I'm already breaking the rules." "So, break them a little more." He kisses him gently, just under his jaw. "You are ridiculous." James continues his light kisses, innocent, purposeless, trailing all along his neck. "Merlin, fine, fine." He's breathing heavy when he steps back, face fully red now, and James can't help but look smug. "You're going to kill me one of these days," Regulus murmurs, running a hand over his short hair, trying to straighten himself out. "Nah, never. What would I do without you?" He sends him a smile that makes something flicker in Regulus's eyes. He has half a mind to ask him about it, but doesn't want to push his luck. "You wait here. Wait here? In the broom cupboard?" I'll go grab the invisibility cloak, ignoring him as his hand reaches for the doorknob. "It'll just take me 5 minutes. James Potter, I am not going to wait for you in a broom cupboard." Regulus does wait for him in a broom cupboard, even if he makes several angry comments about it under his breath after James gets back. With the cloak, it's incredibly easy to get out of the castle and past the Care for Magical Creatures class on the lawn outside. Spring is only just blooming, the weather's still cold enough that you need a jacket or sweater, but the snow is gone, and today the sun is out, making it feel warmer than it is. James waits until they're sufficiently past the tree line before he takes the cloak off. "I can't believe I let you convince me to do this," Regulus mumbles, wand held in his hand like he's expecting to be tacked at any moment. Which is fair enough, there's a bunch of nasties in these trees. Luckily, James knows this place pretty well by now, knows where to go and what not to step on. "I've never skived off class before." James smiles down at him, stepping over a fallen trunk. "What? No, I'm shocked." Regulus shoves him into a nearby tree, and James lets out a laugh that is, admittedly, quite loud. "Merlin, keep your voice down before everything in here knows where we are." James rolls his eyes, pushing some bushes out of the way as he leads them on. Everything worth being afraid of already knows we're here. The branches are thick over their heads, causing the sunlight to drip down, lighting the way in tiny puddles. "I'm sorry." "What?" Regulus turns to him, indignant. "Don't worry, they won't bother us as long as we don't bother them. Just stay out of their space." "Their space," Regulus repeats slowly, like it's the stupidest thing he's ever heard. "How do you know what their space is, exactly?" James shoots him a smile. "You follow me?" "Oh, because you're the Beast Whisperer, are you?" "I just happen to have excellent intuition." He looks at Regulus out of the corner of his eye. "Also, maybe don't call them beasts." "What?" James shrugs. "Just not very polite, is it?" There's a beat or two of silence before Regulus laughs. His laugh is softer than James's, quieter. It's something James always wishes he could hold in his hand or slip in his back pocket and keep for later. "You are an enigma, you know that?" "Me?" James demands, slightly outraged. "You, Regulus Black, want to call me an enigma? Half the time you're this obnoxious Quidditch lad." "I am not a lad. How am I a lad? I don't have lad energy at all." "Oh yes, you do," Regulus goes on, clearly enjoying this a little too much. "Walking through the halls like you own the place, like some bloody jock teen heartthrob." "Oi, you're also a jock." But Regulus shakes his head. "I'm on the Quidditch team," he says, ducking below a low-hanging branch. "But I'm not a jock." That makes no sense at all. Regulus only waves him off. "You really should be an airhead, and then it's like you think about everyone all the time. You care more than anyone I've ever met. He shakes his head, lost for words. And then, "I get it, though, why Sirius was drawn to you, why he became so obsessed." James scoffs, unable to tell if Regulus is being sincere or just having a laugh. "Sirius has never been obsessed with me." "Yes, he has. He is. I used to hate it." And doesn't that just pique James' interest? "Were you jealous?" Regulus huffs out a laugh. "Of course I was jealous. You were cooler than me and older than me, and I knew exactly what was going to happen." "And what's that?" Regulus is quiet for a moment, the noise of twigs snapping under their feet the only thing filling the space between them. "I knew you were going to take him away." He says it like he doesn't want to. like it has to fight its way out of his mouth. I don't think I took him away as much as you lot forced him out. And then, of course, his brain catches up with his mouth and he realizes what he's just said. Or, not you, but luckily, he is saved from having to explain himself as they break through the foliage and into the clearing on the other side. Regulus lets out a gasp that James is pretty sure he's going to be replaying in his head for the next week. Sweet, huh? James says smugly, looking out into the small waterfall in front of them. The water slips down the rocks and pools in decent-sized pond at the bottom, the green vines snaking along the stones only just starting to bud with little pink flowers. He found it last year during one of the full moons, and he's been back with Sirius a few times since. It's beautiful, Regulus says. Without the trees over their head, the sun pours down uninterrupted, making the water sparkle. James nods, knocking his shoulder against Regulus's before stepping forward and starting to unbutton his shirt. Excuse me? What are you doing? Going swimming, obviously. He shoots Regulus a grin as he slides the shirt off his shoulders. Swimming, Regulus repeats indignantly. You can't go swimming in there, James. Are you completely insane? And why not? Well, for starters, it's going to be freezing. Ah, good point. James pulls out his wand, casting a warming charm over the water before bending down to check the temperature with his fingers. Perfect. He winks at Regulus over his shoulder, the younger boy looking scandalized. Did you just warm the whole pond? He asks. Mm-hmm. James straightens up, dropping his wand into the pile with his shirt and glasses. That's a complicated variation on that spell, he says, somewhere in between impressed and annoyed. Is it? James asks innocently, slipping out of his trousers and standing in front of Regulus in his pants. Well, come on. Wait, James, Jesus, you absolute madman. You can't just go jumping into a random body of water in the forest of all places. He sounds nearly hysterical, and James has to bite down on his lower lip to keep from laughing. You have no idea what could be in there. He does, actually, having been in several times. First as a stag, of course. Always safer that way. Reckon we might run into some mermaids? He asks cheekily. Regulus gives him a flat look. That would not be nearly as fun as you seem to think it would be. James shrugs. Well, only one way to find out. No, there is definitely more than one way to find out. Come on, Reg. He stands at the edge of the shore, back to the water. What's life without a little risk? Safe. James only laughs as he falls back into the water. It's deceptively deep, and he flips himself around so he can dive further down before coming back up for air. James Potter, I swear to Merlin, if whatever is in that water doesn't kill you, I will, he hears as he breaks the surface. Reg is on his hands and knees at the water's edge, a stern look on his face. James shakes out his hair, swimming back over. Seems a bit contradictory, don't you think? Regulus makes a growling noise that James secretly loves. Reg, he says softly, sincere as he can manage, it's safe. I promise. Regulus searches his face for a moment. You've done this before? James nods. About a dozen times. Regulus looks no less exasperated. What kind of person wanders into a deadly forest just to have an afternoon swim? James only rolls his eyes, diving back below the surface. The water's so clear that he's almost certain this whole place has been magicked, by the founders or someone who came after. Everything about it is so idyllic, so juxtaposed to the rest of the dark, overgrown forest. He comes back to the surface and finds Regulus on his feet again, shoes and socks off, shirt halfway undone. There we go, James smiles, spitting water out of his mouth. Regulus sends him a dry look. I can't believe I'm doing this. I can. It's brilliant. The younger boy shimmies out of his shirt, and James feels something tug hard on his gut. He'd forgotten that he'd never seen Regulus anything but fully dressed before, and he hadn't quite prepared himself for what it would feel like, which apparently is overwhelming. Shirtless Regulus, James realizes, is a special kind of weakness for him. You're sure there's nothing in there that's going to eat me? Regulus does away with his trousers and comes to stand at the edge of the water. James? What? Sorry. James shakes himself, trying to focus. No sea monsters, oui? James blinks. Was that French? Did you just speak French to me? He's not sure his heart can handle this. Regulus blushes. Sorry, it just slipped out. Do not apologize. Say something else. What? In French. Say something else. James is treading water, shoulders bobbing in and out of the pond, and he's glad to have an excuse for the breathless sound of his voice. For a moment, he doesn't think Reg is going to do it. He just stands there, watching him. And then, Je perds de te blesser. His voice is soft, changed by the different accent. The syllables gooey in a way they aren't in English. Parce que je t'aime. Je pense que je le ferai toujours. James makes a pleased humming sound. What did you say? Regulus blinks before looking away. I said your hair looks ridiculous. James scowls. Did not. Are you suddenly fluent in French, Potter? Oh, please. He rolls his eyes. Don't start with Potter again. Makes me feel like I'm in detention or something. Regulus snorts. A familiar feeling for you, I'm sure. Ha, ha, ha. Now get in here before I drag you in. Pfft, Regulus scoffs. You, what? But before he can finish, he gets a face full of water as James splashes what seems like nearly half the pond on him. You are 5, Regulus bites out, wiping the water from his face. James only laughs. Big words from the man still standing on the shore. He starts to swim further out, but stays on his back so he doesn't break eye contact with Reg. Come on, Black. Come and get me. He sees the light flash in Regulus's eyes. You're mine, Potter. James laughs again, turning to swim away properly as he hears Regulus hit the water. Yes, he thinks, cutting across the pond. Yes, I am. A while later, they're lying on their backs in the sun, Regulus dressed again, James still just in his pants, both with their eyes closed, enjoying the warmth. We'll have to go back eventually. I can't skip out on the whole day, Regulus says, causing James to make a childish grumbling noise. Ugh, why? School is so miserable. Here is so nice. Yeah, nice until something eats us, James snorts. Nothing is going to eat us. If you say so. James cracks his eyes open, turning his head to look at Regulus. It really is a bit ridiculous how much he enjoys it. Just watching him. How he could do it all day long. His skin is flushed from the sun, curls slightly tighter after the water. James wants to run his hands through them, but he's pretty sure Reg doesn't want to be touched right now. He's gotten pretty good at picking up on his moons, on the way they shift. There are good days and bad days, sure, but there are also good moments and bad moments. It changes, even within the time they spend together. James understands that, even if he doesn't know why. You're staring, Regulus says without opening his eyes. James smiles. You're beautiful. Regulus makes an indignant noise. I don't know why you say that. I don't know why you don't believe it. He sees Regulus tense and then force himself to relax. I've never heard it before, which James thinks is a travesty. Well, you are. Silence drifts back around them, filled by the noise of the breeze in the trees and the humming of the water beside them. Hey, Reg, James finds himself asking. Have you done this? He motions between the two of them. Before? He feels the stillness as much as he sees it, watching Regulus's Adam's apple bob up and down as he swallows. Yes, he says carefully. James thinks that, deep down, he already knew that, but he still finds himself surprised by it. Was it serious? He watches lines appear on Regulus's face as he squeezes his eyes more tightly closed. I guess that would depend on your idea of serious. James accepts this, resisting the urge to reach out and smooth the wrinkles from his face. And they never told you you were beautiful? He hears Regulus's breathing hitch. Reg, no, he interrupts quickly. They didn't see me that way. Most people don't see me the way you see me. Je ne le mérite pas. James feels his chest grow tight at the tone of Regulus's voice, rolling toward him and onto his side. It's not the way I see you. It's just the way you are. Regulus brings his hands up to cover his face. You can't say things like that to me. His words are choked, like he doesn't have the air to force them out. Why? Because they hurt. They aren't supposed to. Regulus nods, dropping his hands to look at James again. I know. And oh, that look breaks his heart. I'm sorry, James whispers, but Regulus just shakes his head. Don't be. He reaches out and runs his hands through James's wet hair. James closes his eyes, falling into the touch. I just wish I wish this was easier. There's a delicacy to this confession, a vulnerability that James knows Regulus hates. His hand pauses, thumb rubbing gentle circles into James's temple. I don't think important things are supposed to be easy, he says, voice soft. He opens his eyes to find Regulus has rolled onto his side as well. You're important, Reg. You're so fucking important. Especially to me. Regulus's eyes widen, thumb stilling. Je ne te mérite pas, he mumbles again. What does that mean? James asks, practically whispering. Anything else would feel too loud in the fragile space that's built up around them. Regulus looks back at him, gray eyes so full of so much feeling they nearly swallow James whole. Eventually, he exhales, propping himself up on his elbow and leaning down to press a chaste kiss to James's mouth. He can taste the water, the sunlight, the sadness. Regulus pulls back, still leaning over him. I said your hair looks ridiculous. A choked laugh finds its way up James's throat. I don't believe you. He turns his head, kissing the palm of the hand that's still holding him. Regulus smiles sadly. Good. They head back to the castle for lunch. James makes several attempts to dry his hair with little success. Domestic spells have never been his strong suit, but even Regulus can't seem to get it to work. There's just so much of it, he says, exasperated. Whatever. If anyone asks, I'll just tell them I took a shower or something. Regulus arches his brow. Do people often ask you about your hair? Obviously. He makes a show of primping it. It's got quite the fan club. I'm sure it does. They part in an empty corridor, James whipping off the cloak and Regulus instantly pulling away. I'll see you later, yeah? The younger boy nods. Yeah. James makes a run back to Gryffindor Tower to drop off the cloak and grab his books. He tries to do something with his hair again, but it's no use. You are bloody ridiculous, he mutters at it before giving up and heading for the Great Hall. He's about 2 corridors away when he spots his friends, chatting against a wall outside of class. He's in such a good mood that he forgets that he ditched them without any warning this morning, that he went to the owlery and never came back. Forgets that they will almost certainly demand an explanation. He blames the sun, blames Regulus's mouth. They've made his brain go fuzzy. James! Peter's the first one to see him, causing the other 2 to swivel toward him. James smiles until he sees the expression on Sirius's face. Oh, he thinks. Oh, shit. That was some trip up to the owlery, his friend says coldly. Is your hair wet? Remus asks, squinting at him. Fuck. Yeah, I took a shower. Where? Sirius demands, voice almost as sharp as the look in his eyes. What? Where? Where did you take your shower? Because it wasn't in our room. We checked. James opens and closes his mouth several times, but can't quite make any words come out. What? Nothing? Sirius, Remus cautions, and James appreciates the effort, but they both know it's a lost cause. You taking your walks in the middle of the day now? Damn, Jamie, it's a miracle you can stand with all the bloody walking you do. Sirius? No, fuck you. Sirius cuts him off, clearly fuming. I'm so tired of your bullshit. I mean, you can't even be bothered to come up with a decent lie, for fuck's sake. You couldn't care less about us if you tried. Okay, James cuts across him. That's not fair. Yeah, whatever. I'm done with this. Sirius makes to walk away, but James grabs his arm and then, in a split-second decision, starts dragging him toward the empty classroom next to them. Oi, Sirius says indignantly, but he doesn't really put up much of a fight. James? Remus steps forward, eyes traveling nervously between the pair of them, clearly unsure of whether or not he should step in. Me and Pads need to have a talk. We'll meet you guys in the Great Hall, yeah? Remus still hesitates, hovering in the doorway as James shoves Sirius inside. Mooney, I'm not going to fight him. I promise. I just want to talk. I might fight him, Sirius calls from behind James. Remus raises his eyebrow, but James waves his concerns away. If he really wants to throw a punch, I can take it. Well, that's comforting, Remus says dryly. He looks between them one more time before shaking his head. Come on, Pete. Let's go. He disappears back into the corridor, door closing behind him. James exhales, gearing himself up for whatever the hell is coming next, because, to be honest, he doesn't really have a plan. Sirius glares at him. So, he spits, are we going to discuss your favorite routes? Sirius. The sights you see along the way? I hear the grounds are great for bird watching. Maybe that's what you've been doing with your time. Sirius. Of course, Probably not the best time for birdwatching, the middle of the night. Stargazing, then? Shall we discuss our favorite constellations? Mine, personally, is Alpha Canis Majoris, but you can see why I might be slightly biased. I've been seeing someone. Sirius shuts his mouth, the tirade of words coming to an end, leaving them just standing there, staring at one another. The silence feels deafening. Yeah, Sirius says finally, some of the energy gone out of him, but none of the anger. That still simmers under his words. No shit. James doesn't exactly know what to say to that. You've been lying about it for months. Poorly, sure, but still lying. To me. Yeah. James refrains from pointing out that Sirius has also been lying, or at the very least neglecting to mention that he snogged one of their best mates. He can't exactly see that accusation going over well right now. Sirius stares at him expectantly, clearly waiting for some kind of explanation. He takes a deep breath. It's a bloke. Sirius blinks, his entire body going rigid. It's such a sudden change that James can spot it even from across the room. What? The person I've been seeing. He's a boy. He doesn't want anyone to know. That's why I didn't tell you. I'm sorry. Really. He says it quickly because he knows if he takes his time, he won't get it out, that the words will get stuck in his throat. It's not the whole truth, he knows that, but it's as close as he can get right now. The silence is stretching on too long, and James can feel himself growing anxious. He hopes that this wasn't a mistake. He wanted to make things better. He wanted to get rid of the wall that's been slowly building itself between him and Sirius the past few months. He wanted his friend back. You didn't tell me because he asked you not to, Sirius says finally, or you didn't tell me because you were afraid of how I'd react. James sighs, passing a hand over his face and meeting Sirius's eye. Does it matter? Yes, to me, it matters. He's not sure what the right answer is here, if there is a right answer. Both, he says finally. It was both. He can't read the expression on Sirius's face. He has no idea what he's feeling. James just wants to tell him it's okay, that they're okay. He opens his mouth to say as much when Sirius suddenly starts forward. He's leaving, James thinks, feeling his heart clench. Fuck. But then Sirius wraps his arms around him, pulling him close, and in his shock, it takes James a few minutes to respond, to hold him back. I'm sorry, Sirius says, squeezing him. I'm sorry for whatever I did that made you think you couldn't tell me. James doesn't think he's ever been so relieved in his life, a shaking breath escaping his lungs as he drops his head against his friend's shoulder. God, I'm so glad that you... But his voice cuts out on him, an unexpected wave of emotion closing his throat. You're my brother, James, my family. There's nothing... Sirius pulls back so they can look at each other. There's nothing bigger than that, okay? Not ever. James feels ridiculous, getting choked up over this, but he'd been so worried. I feel the same, he coughs, clearing his throat, trying to get rid of some of the tightness. Obviously. Now who's gone soft, eh? Sirius grins and James shoves him. It feels good. It feels like he can breathe again. He still doesn't know it's Regulus, but James pushes that thought away, not willing to deal with it right now. Listen, Sirius's expression is sincere again. There's something I need to tell, but at that moment, Albus Dumbledore's voice fills up the room. All students are to go to the Great Hall immediately. I repeat, all students are to go to the Great Hall immediately. What the hell was that? Sirius demands, looking around like he's expecting to find the headmaster standing behind him. James shakes his head, hands dropping away from his ears. No idea. Never heard him do that before. Oi, Sirius says suddenly. You reckon they caught the people who put up the mark? James shrugs. You think they'd call a school assembly for that? Usually they make us wait to get the news from the prophet like everyone else. Yeah, but these are extreme circumstances. And while James is still skeptical, he can't say that Sirius doesn't have a point. God, who knows? Maybe. He can already hear the sounds of students outside the door. Well, I hope they did. I can't wait to see those bastards crumble in front of the Wizimagot. You think they will? James asks as they push their way outside. The halls are a mess, confused students looking around, making their ways uncertainly toward the Great Hall. Of course, you know they're all Slytherins. Big and bad until McGonagall has them in her sights, and then it's, Please, Professor, I don't mean it, Professor. Please don't be mean to me, Professor. James snorts. Sounds like you're doing an impression of Peter.
Sirius barks out a laugh so loud the people in front of him turn back in alarm. You can't tell him I said that. Oh, I'm definitely going to. Come on, you know he... Here, James, Sirius. James looks ahead to see Remus waving at them through the chaos that is the Great Hall. James waves back, grabbing hold of Sirius and dragging him through the sea of students to where their friends are sitting at the Gryffindor table. Any idea what's going on? James asks as they sit down. Remus shakes his head. Not a clue. We just got here and then the food disappeared, Peter adds, looking mournfully at the table. Hey, Remus says, a bit quieter, nudging James. You two work it out? He nods to Sirius, whose eyes are trained on the professors at the head table. Yeah, James gives him a smile. Yeah, we worked it out. Good. Everyone! All heads snap toward the front of the room where Dumbledore stands at the podium, wand pointed at his throat. Quiet! The reaction is instant. Couldn't have been faster if it had been enforced by magic. James looks over at the Slytherin table, but he can't spot Regulus amongst the crowd of green and silver. Better, Dumbledore smiles kindly, lowering his wand. Behind him, all the teachers are assembled, but none of them are sitting, which feels a bit ominous, if James is being honest. Now, the headmaster goes on, as I am sure you are all aware, a few months ago a mark was cast over London, one that has been associated with a group of witches and wizards who call themselves Death Eaters. He pauses, eyes running over the body of students before him. James isn't sure he's ever heard the Great Hall so quiet. Everything is still. It feels like even the enchanted sky above them has frozen. It is now believed that this was a warning, foreshadowing an attack that took place today in Diagon Alley. James feels the air rush out of his lungs. Frightened whispers growing up all around him. Dumbledore raises his hand, and without even having to say a word, all mouths shut. As of right now, he licks his lips. 13 people have been pronounced dead. 5 are in critical care at St. Mungo's. Nothing can keep the silence after that. 13? He hears Remus hiss beside him. That's never happened before, has it? He looks at James as if he knows. There's never been that many. It is believed, Dumbledore continues, speaking over all the other voices, that the victims were specifically targeted. We do not, at this time, have confirmation on the names of the victims, but classes have been canceled for the rest of the afternoon, and students will be summoned one at a time by their heads of house to contact their families. He gives them another sweeping look. In this hour of tragedy, our friends are our greatest resource, our strength. Be there for one another, and we will make it through this. Thank you. You are dismissed. There's shuffling, feet on the floor, benches being pushed back from the table, but James can't move, an icy sensation dripping down his bones. James? Remus asks, but he barely registers it, his name floating past him, unable to permeate the new bubble of panic slowly surrounding him. Hey, Prongs. Sirius's hand comes down, warm and steadying on his shoulder, and James blinks up at him. What is it? James swallows. My mom, his voice breaks. She said she was going to Diagon Alley. They end up outside on the lawn. James grabs his snitch, something to do, something to keep his hands busy. He wanted to fly, but Flitwick saw him with his broom and quickly put a stop to that plan. Apparently, all students are to remain on the ground for the foreseeable future. He begged McGonagall to let him flew his parents. Alphabetical order, Potter, she said, already sweeping past him with the first student. I am sorry. So here he is, sitting with his friends on the lawn, throwing a snitch up and down and trying not to think about the fact that his mom might be, well. There are other students around, though most groups are like them, tense, quiet. It feels weird, their fear out of place under the sun. The world does not look tragic, and somehow that makes it all the more unnerving. Remus lets out a sharp hissing noise, and James looks down in time to catch him grimacing at his potions textbook. You okay, Moony? He nods stiffly. Yeah, sorry. Don't apologize. You need me to grab your pain potion? Sirius asks, propping himself up on his elbows. But Remus shakes his head again. Nah, it's not so bad this month. The full moon is tomorrow. James had almost forgotten. He runs his friend over one more time. Pale, purple bags under his eyes, shivering slightly. You let us know if you want to go back up to the room, okay? James says, even though he doesn't think he could stand sitting in that quiet. At least out here, there are things to distract himself with. At least out here, he doesn't feel trapped. Thanks, but I'm fine, really. Remus had already been called up to McGonagall's office. His mother was there, his father at work, both fine. It's good. Remus doesn't need any more tragedy in his life. James tries not to let the other thoughts in, the ones that say it makes it just a little bit more likely that his mom is one of the victims. Lyle Lupin would make sense as a target. He's already been one once, after all. James hates himself for thinking that, hates himself for wanting it even for a second. This time, when he catches the snitch, his hand wraps around it a little more tightly. Just not my mom, he thinks over and over again. Not my mom, anyone but my mom, which again is a shitty thing to want, especially as he looks at the other kids around him. There aren't that many witches and wizards in the world. Really, there aren't. That 13 today, 13? Just not my mom, please, not my mom, anyone but my mom. He can't remember the last time he told her that he loved her. He thinks of the pitiful letters he's been sending home, once every 3 weeks at most, barely a paragraph long. How could he be so callous? He loves his dad. Really, he does, but his home is his mom. Without her, he... James? His head snaps up at the feel of Sirius's hand on his arm. James tries to breathe. She's going to be okay, Sirius says, voice firm, no hint of doubt. His eyes demand James to stay still, just for a moment, demand he hear what's being said to him. I promise. And he wants to tell him that he can't possibly promise that, except that the brilliant thing about Sirius Black, his best mate, is that he makes you believe that he can. James nods stiffly. Thanks. Course. Sirius is only just pulled back when the sound of smug laughter cuts across the lawn. James looks up and sees Snape and Mulciber coming out of the castle. They're fucking laughing. He sees Regulus pushed against a wall, sees him struggling to breathe, sees Snape looming over him, not giving a shit. I just hope I'm there to see it, Snape had said to him. See what? See them break you. It happens so fast. Like a switch has been flicked in his brain, and suddenly all his fear and regret and pain turns to anger. It hits him so hard that he shakes with it. He's on his feet before he can think about what he's doing. Someone calls his name. Remus, he thinks, but he doesn't turn away. His wand is already out by the time Snape sees him coming. He doesn't care that they're in the open, surrounded by people, that he will definitely be punished for this. Good, he thinks. Let them watch. Levi Corpus, James snaps, dragging Snape up in the air by his ankles. He sees Mulciber raise his wand, but it's knocked out of his hand in the same moment Sirius comes up beside him. Thanks, Pats. Anytime, Prongs. What the fuck, Potter? Snape shouts, voice loud in the somber afternoon. There's something dangerous in the air. Something that snaps and crackles and threatens to ignite. And James is glad for it, because someone might have hurt his mom, and that makes him want to burn the world to the ground. Hey, Pads, he says, loud enough that everyone watching can hear. He fully intends to make a show of this. What color do you reckon Snivelus's pants are? Ugh, Prongs, Sirius responds in the same showman-like tone, and honestly, it feels good. The two of them, doing what they do best. You're going to make me sick up my lunch. He hears snickering from some of their audience and feels a nasty smirk curling his lips. You think he washes them as much as he washes his hair? You mean never? Fuck you, Snape punches out, struggling, though James can't imagine why. It's his spell. He ought to know better than anyone that there's no way he's getting down until James puts him down. Want to bet on it? I say they're green. Sirius smirks. My money's on gray. Or brown. The creep has no style. Do you want to do the honors, or... What the hell are you doing? Her voice cuts through the lawn like a knife. James feels it against his skin, the anger in her voice that hasn't been directed at him in a long time. Ah, Evans, here to see the show. She comes up beside him, but he doesn't take his eyes off Snape, doesn't want to look at her face. James, she says more quietly, almost desperately. James, I know you're worried, but this... I thought you were trying to be better than this. And that irks him. Maybe because it's true. Maybe because she's still defending Snape. Even now. Even after everything that's happened today and everything she knows that he is. He's one of them, he says through gritted teeth. You don't know that. Sure I do. She makes an exasperated noise. You can't punish him just because you feel bad. It won't change anything. It'll just make it worse. And oh, that's just bang out of order, because that is not what he's doing. He isn't making this up just to feel better. I thought you were done with him, huh? You told me that. You said it. You don't like him anymore. His voice is starting getting louder again. Was that all talk, Lily? Just bullshit? No, she grits out. But none of that makes what you're doing okay. Oh, and who made you the moral authority? What makes you so good? This is ridiculous. Put him down. No. And this time, James does look at her. Looks at her dead in the eye. Now shut up or go away. Just not my mom. Please, not my mom. Anyone but my mom. Serious? He says, turning back to Snape. Take off his trousers. And to his credit, Sirius doesn't hesitate. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Black. Lily's voice is cold. Unless you want your friend to get stupefied at close range. James almost laughs, looking over at her raised wand. You gonna hex me, Evans? She doesn't even blink. Absolutely. Now put him down. He holds her gaze, unwavering green eyes boring into his. Part of him wants to push her, to see if she really means it. But then, one look at her is all he needs to know that she does. Well, Snivelus, aren't you lucky the pretty girl came to your rescue? He announced coldly, a smile on his face that feels sharp. Ever the gentleman, always leaving a woman to fight your battles for you. There's more snickering from the surrounding crowd. He watches Snape's face contort with rage and embarrassment, and he thinks this might actually be better than taking his trousers off. And then, I don't need a filthy mudblood to defend me. He's not entirely certain what happens next. Everything goes a bit hazy. He knows he drops his wand, and Snape along with it, and he's on top of him, driving his fist into his ugly face. He's not thinking. Not really. It's all feeling pouring out of him and into Snape's bleeding mouth. The violence feels good. All that anxiety and fear finally finding the outlet it's been craving, and for a moment, he can't remember why he ever wanted to be better than this. And then he's thrown back. Magic. He lands on his back a few paces away, the air knocked from his lungs. He sits up, trying to get on his feet again, but finds a wand in his face. Don't, Lily says through clenched teeth. You heard what he said, what he called you, James says indignantly. But Lily only shakes her head. Don't you dare use me as an excuse, James Potter. It's the break in her voice that catches his attention. And suddenly he can see the wetness in her eyes. Don't you fucking dare. She waits a moment longer before sliding her wand back up her sleeve and turning away. James sees Mary and Marlene hovering in the background, concerned looks on their faces as she walks right by them. Snape, of course, is gone. James suddenly feels exhausted. Christ, Prongs, are you all right? Sirius comes up beside him, and James lets out a breath that might be a laugh, bringing his hands up to his face, needing a minute. He tries to think of this morning, to remember how it had felt to hear Regulus laugh, to see him smiling in the sun, the warmth of his hands, his mouth, and suddenly he wants him, just to feel his touch, to hear his voice, and he could tell Reg, he thinks, all the terrible thoughts he's had, the weak thoughts, and he'd understand. Just not my mom. Please, not my mom, anyone but my mom. Regulus doesn't need him to be better, to be stronger. He doesn't know why that suddenly makes his chest feel too tight. He just wants to be back in their room, just wants to lie next to him in bed and listen to him talk about gods and mortals and a love that can't be stopped by violence and war and death. James. Potter? James's head snaps up as Frank walks toward them. He falters for a moment, taking in the state of James and seemingly deciding not to comment. He nods his head back toward the castle. It's your turn. Oh, thank God, James breathes, scrambling to his feet. He's barely taken 5 steps before something pulls him back. Sirius. His friend is still kneeling in the grass. Are you coming? He sees it, the surprise, followed quickly by gratitude. Sirius nods, quickly jogging up to him and causing Frank to arch his brow. It's supposed to be just family. He is family, James says, in a voice that has Frank raising his hands in surrender. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. James doesn't bother responding, walking so fast he's practically running into the building. She's going to be okay, Sirius murmurs beside him. James only nods, no longer able to muster a response. He feels like his insides are tearing themselves apart. He thinks about the letter he sent this morning, how inadequate it was, all the things he needs to tell her, needs her to know. Mr. Potter? McGonagall barely even blinks when he storms into her office, Sirius at his side. Mr. Black? She's sitting at her desk, the fire burning next to her, and he sees... Dad! His voice catches in his throat. It's just him. No, 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 no. He feels Sirius wrap his hand around his arm and squeeze. Dad, where... James! His mother is pushing into view, sounding slightly breathless. Sorry, I just went to turn the kettle off. She smiles, and he feels his legs almost give out. Thank Merlin for Sirius, who is probably the only reason he doesn't collapse right then and there. Mom. His voice is weak as they stumble forward, both of them getting on their hands and knees by the fire. You're okay. She looks confused. I am. Of course I am. You said in your letter that you said you were going to Diagon Alley, and suddenly her eyes grow wide. Oh, darling, no. Not today. James is feeling so many things right now that all that comes out of him is a wet-sounding laugh. I'm so sorry, she says. Merlin, that must have been terrible for you. He shakes his head. I'm just glad you're okay. I love you. I love you both so, so much. I'm sorry I don't say that enough. Gosh, James, his dad says, running a hand through his hair in a way that's nearly identical to his son. Don't make me cry in front of Minerva. She'll lose all respect for me. Never, Fleamont, comes McGonagall's voice from behind them. Sirius, are you all right, honey? James looks beside himself to find his best friend with wet eyes. Yeah, I'm just glad you guys are okay. James realizes for the first time how scared Sirius has been, and how he buried it so he could be strong for James. He swears his heart swells so much it nearly breaks his ribs. Oh, well, now you've gone and done it, Fleamont says as he pulls off his glasses to wipe his eyes. Oi, how come he's the one who makes you cry? James demands. I like him better than you. And that has them all laughing. James feels himself take a proper breath for the first time since he heard Dumbledore's booming voice, looking at the people he loves, smiling and crying and safe. He thinks, okay. Maybe we'll be okay. Maybe we'll make it through this. Chapter endnotes. First translation. I'm afraid of hurting you because I love you. I think I always will. Second translation. I don't deserve it. Third translation. I don't deserve you. Hello, beautiful people. Does this chapter work? I sure hope so, because it's becoming one of those things where I feel like I've been looking at it for so long that I don't even know what it is anymore. Your comments are cupcakes and sunshine. Thank you.